This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr. Lisa Mateo has chosen to be with us today. Still 90 degrees where we are. Hope you are cool, calm, and collected as well into an earnings season. Really, our focus today, besides what's going on in Washington, Paul, is earnings upon us.
It is. We got some of the airlines on Thursday. We'll hear from them, see if people are still jetting all over the place. And then Friday, of course, the big banks like JP Morgan. We'll see what Jamie Dimon has to say.
Have you ever made money in airline stocks?
I don't think so. It is such a tough
long ago,
business.
like 30, 40 years ago, it's such a tough business.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, who knows what consumers want to do and how you fill the planes. And then, you have to hedge against your fuel and all that type of thing. It's a tough business.
And right now, there's I think Helene Becker would say, just as an idea, there's too much capacity.
Yeah, you could argue that, and then you can't get the planes you need because Boeing's having its problems, and so you have to deal with your schedules that way. So anyway, tough business, but they're in it and to win it. And
then we go into banks. It's a tough business.
Well, I mean,
I swear the bank earnings, Paul. I swear they downplay. They don't want people to know how much money they're making.
It's just extraordinary. And every quarter, it seems like a record quarter for a lot of these people. I mean, just looking at J.P. Morgan, for their 2024, the street's expecting almost $50 billion of net income. I mean, and that's 29% net margin. 29% net margin. Right. Just extraordinary. So.
Huge response yesterday. Paul Sweeney getting on a Vespa. We'll talk about that through the day. Huge response. I think it single-handedly lifted the CAC 40 in Paris, knowing you were on a Vespa. We say good morning. We're on YouTube. You go to Google, whatever, and you search YouTube Bloomberg Podcast. Sign up for Bloomberg Podcast. That's the best you can do. You get the Tim Carroll Show in the afternoon. Many other things. You get Alex. Did you guys cover Bitcoin yesterday?
Oh, yeah. All over it. Yeah.
Why is it down?
I don't know. Just, but now we're up today, a couple of percent. It's all over the place.
Apple CarPlay, Android Auto as well. We're in the Interactive Broker Studios with our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. We have futures advancing. This is after another record-setting day on Wall Street. The S&P 500 registered its 35th high of the year. Right now, S&P futures up about 0.2%. We have Dow futures up 0.1%. NASDAQ futures up nearly 0.5%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.63%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.29%, and that's up 1 basis point. Economic calendar jam-packed this week. 10 a.m. it starts with Wall Street time. Jay Powell delivers the Fed's semi-annual testimony to the Senate Banking Committee. And then tomorrow, he's back at it again. He has the House Financial Services Committee tomorrow. Thursday, it's Consumer Price Index for June. We have initial jobless claims for last week. And then Friday, the Producer Price Index. Also a read on consumer sentiment and big bank earnings, starting with the likes of JP Morgan Chase. Shares of Boeing, that's where we're headed to. They're little change right now. The company in talks with the Defense Department, preserve its contract business. And this is after agreeing to plead guilty to criminal charges. That was yesterday. Now, meanwhile, the FAA ordered airlines to inspect the oxygen generators of more than 2,600 Boeing 737 jets registered in the U.S. And finally, United Airlines says another of its Boeing aircraft, it lost a main landing gear wheel during takeoff. No one was injured. Shares of United Airlines up about 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
And it's happened before, right?
I don't know, but I'm taking a United flight today.
Where are you off to?
Going to Hollywood, California.
Oh, please. No.
I'm going Hollywood.
We were going to do this later in the hour. This was carefully coordinated. The interns, at our 3 a.m. meeting, the interns said, push this down.
Okay.
No, let's take it at the top of the 7. Sam Stovall can wait. We're doing what, Lisa Mateo?
The National Association of Hispanic Journalists Conference is taking place there. So I'll be there for the next
This is at the
days.
Sunset Tower Hotel.
I wish. I don't know. The Lowe's Hollywood.
The Lowe's Hollywood.
Yes,
wow.
poolside. Ooh, good.
Okay.
Oh, boy.
And
it should be fun.
You greet
Follow
people.
Lisa on social.
Yes. We'll be at the big Bloomberg booth there, greeting people, telling you all about.
We're sending the heavyweights. I mean, Caroline Gage is going, and others. I mean, this is serious stuff for us. Lisa Mateo in Hollywood. We'll continue to watch her adventures as well. Taking too long right now. Sam Stovall to get us started on the earnings season. Sam, let's talk about why we're talking to Sam Stovall. You people look at individual stocks. You look at sectors from the standpoint of not market timing. You gotta be in the market. What is the distinctive CFRA change in your analysis at mid-year?
Well, I would say, Tom, that the change really is that I'm getting a bit nervous about where we are with valuations. Yes, it does appear as if this will probably be the 59th out of the last 61 quarters in which actuals exceed end of quarter estimates, proving once again that management does a very good job of managing expectations. But when I look at the valuations and I see that the S&P 500 is trading at a 35% premium to its average PE over the last 20 years. I look at tech trading at a 74% premium. My feeling is that earnings really have to come through, and they have to be much better than expected in order for us to avoid a digestion of recent gains.
What do you say down the income statement then? At the margin level, are your analysts seeing, are they confident in sustained margins?
Margins are actually looking pretty good. Expectations are for a 3.9% gain. That was the end of the quarter. But already that profit margin forecast has come up a bit to 4.3% for the S&P 500. Tech is supposed to be up about 5%. Communication services close to a 11% profit margin growth year on year. So profit margins don't seem to be an issue at this point. So the real question is, are prices simply leading fundamentals, and that the fundamentals will soon catch up?
Sam, how concerned are you about the concentration of valuation in these top tech names, the Magnificent Seven? I mean, you see all kinds of numbers out there, and that really just suggests a lot of concentration risk, a lack of breadth in this market. How concerned are you about that?
I am a bit concerned by that, Paul. When I go back to 1994 for the S&P cap-weighted 500 versus the equal-weight 500 information technology sector, right now we are 2 standard deviations above the mean in terms of the relative performance for the cap-weighted tech versus the equal-weighted tech. At the same time, we are looking at technology representing more than 33% of the cap-weighted 500, which again is rivaling where we were back in 2000. So my feeling is that things have to either give in terms of growth for earnings improving or possibly a broadening of the participation in the advance in this market.
To the extent folks want to maybe get some, I don't know, branch out from some of those big tech names, Sam, are there areas that you and your analysts think might be of interest, whether it's, I don't know, financials, healthcare? I'm not sure where to go.
Well, yes. Right now, we do have overweight recommendations on the communication services, technology, and the financial sectors. If you wanted to add an additional one, you could be looking at the industrials at this point. The thought being that you want to be focusing on some of the still larger cap companies, because we have the mid cap and the 400 trading at more than 30% discounts on a relative basis to the S&P 500. And it's fundamentals look good, but the timing is not right in terms of technicals. So I would tend to say you stick with the larger cap stocks, but you gravitate toward other areas that would benefit from a lower interest rate environment.
How do you model revenues right now? I mean, I know you're not doing a nominal GDP exercise, but you think back to Jack Welch, who well, Sam Stovall, and there was pricing power, and that pricing power was revenue surprises. Are we going to get revenue surprises up or down?
Revenue is expected to be up a little more than 4% for the S&P 500. Some areas are expected to do pretty well. Technology up by 11%, energy up by 10%, and communication services up by about 9%. So revenue in those areas that are doing well because investors are focusing on growth, but areas like materials, like consumer discretionary, you're going to be seeing a decline.
Rich, can you make a note? We got to get Mr. Stovall again. I got like 8 more questions on revenue. Okay, and we're out of time. I want Sam Stovall in the next couple days, talk to his people. Okay, talk to Stovall's people. Sam, that was brilliant on revenue, this gap between a 4% average, Paul.
Yep.
And 11% for the fancy stocks.
I know.
Which means everybody else is doing 2%.
Exactly.
I think that's how the math goes. Sam Stovall, thank you so much with CFRA. We're going to get him back on soon here in earnings season, really to talk about the top of the income statement. Futures, green on the screen, futures up 12. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa, a new leadership test for President Biden today as he hosts 3 days of meetings with more than 30 NATO leaders. But the summit, no doubt, will be overshadowed by those calls for Biden to drop out of the race. Bloomberg News editor Kevin Whitelaw.
I think for Joe Biden, the struggle is how do you break out of a news cycle where every day, every moment, people are looking for signs of age, signs of declining health or mental ability, and every stumble, every slip is going to be magnified 1,000 times.
Meanwhile, Biden is getting support from members of the so-called progressive squad. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal says that she is standing behind the party and the president.
At the end of the day, he is our nominee right now until he's not our nominee, and I think we shouldn't do Trump and Republicans' dirty work for them.
Congresswoman Jayapal says the pressure on the president has shifted focus away from the Trump campaign and former President Trump for lying on the debate stage. Meanwhile, Republican National Committee co-chair Lara Trump defended the party's newly approved platform. It supports access to birth control and leaves abortion to the states.
It has Donald Trump written all over it. This is his platform, and I don't think there's any confusion about that, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
The former president has yet to make a final decision on his vice presidential pick. However, he tells Fox he plans to make an announcement in the coming week. Beryl has been downgraded to a tropical depression as it moves through Arkansas. In its wake, the storm that hit the Texas coast as a hurricane yesterday morning has left a trail of misery. Utility crews were in the streets of Houston assessing the storm's aftermath. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with the Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Huge news flow this morning on all that's going on in the United Kingdom, maybe less so. In France, still heated. And we can talk about that all morning, but we won't. And then in Washington. And Paul, everyone's distracted. Everyone's trying to get through the day. It like 2-3 p.m. yesterday, I literally almost burnt my feet on my deck. I had to take the beasts out, give them the puppy, the mid-afternoon puppy bath.
Yeah.
And the heat was distracting, but there's so much going on. We've got Wendy Schiller.
Yes.
Greg Vallier, David Gurrow will be with us.
Yep.
And the NATO meetings creep up. And Americans are sort of like, yeah, so what?
Yeah.
But it's a huge so what.
It's a huge so what, particularly when you think about Ukraine and Russia and kind of where the NATO goes from here in terms of its support for Ukraine and
the funding that Donald Trump has talked about.
Exactly.
I mean, he's the one that started this, and they're responding to it. And of course, the president, I'm sure, will comment on Sweden and Finland, part of NATO, which I still can't get used to.
No,
just
it's
amazing.
Wonderful for the northern part of Europe to have that security.
I will editorialize and say, yes, I agree. I think it's wonderful. But we'll have a lot of coverage on that. Amory Horton really focused on that as well. Futures up 13 from New York City. Stay with us, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Discover the future of trading with their next generation trading platform, IBKR Desktop. Download IBKR Desktop at ibkr.com/desktop. To the markets we go, where futures are advancing. Investors kind of awaiting Fed Chair Jay Powell's testimony to Congress for any clues on interest rate cuts. Markets pricing the chance of 2 rate cuts this year with a roughly 70% chance of the first one in September. So right now we have NASDAQ futures up 0.3%. Dow futures little change, up 32 points. S&P futures up 0.2% or 12 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.63%. That's little change. And the yield on the 10-year 4.29%. That's up 1 basis point. We have spot gold higher at 2,361 an ounce. Brent crude $85 a barrel. WTI crude $81 a barrel. Shares of BP down 4% in London after saying it's going to take a hit of as much as $2 billion from impairments in second quarter results. And sources say Saudi Aramco plans to raise at least $3 billion from its first bond sale in 3 years. Those shares down about 0.1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. You say good morning. We're watching earnings season really unfold here at JP Morgan and Citigroup, I believe, on Friday. Getting started. Thank you, Sam Stovall, for getting us started on that. Nice lift to the market this morning. First thing, somebody asked me yesterday, they said, what do you look at when you go in the morning? And it varies really every morning, Paul, but I really got to say the crutch that I have is the 10-year inflation-adjusted yield.
Okay.
2.03%, within its range.
Yep.
In the heat of the French election, it went down to maybe 2.00, I'll say. But it hasn't, we're in a range.
Yeah.
It really hasn't.
Yep, and that's what we hear from Ira Jersey, kind of talking
what
about
do you
range
first look at besides your Vespa manual? What's the first thing you look at?
I look at kind of short-term rates, Tom. I mean, because I'm wanting to know where the Fed's going to go here. And I look at the 2-year Treasury, we're 4.63%. Right. It's been, remember, we were at 5%, about a month ago. Yeah. So rates really coming in.
We begin our coverage now of what's going on in Washington. David Gura, Greg Villiers to be with us later. We start strong from Brown University, the Taubman Center, Wendy Schiller, who, whatever your political persuasion, has really given us historical perspective. Wendy, I read every word of the Wall Street Journal TikTok this morning, and I assume they interviewed 40 people, blah, blah, blah. This goes on forever about the ageless battle of hiding a fragile president's health. Can you compare this to Woodrow Wilson? Can you compare it to other moments in history? Or is this original territory for our listeners and viewers with President Biden?
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Paul. I think you might compare it to Ronald Reagan more than Woodrow Wilson, simply because of the media access. And of course, you start to have much more talk radio. You have the nascent C-SPAN cable, but you have sort of media at full force and objective. Theoretically, as you know, when Woodrow Wilson was president in the early part of the 20th century, the media was not, quote unquote, objective. It was fairly partisan slanted. So now you're looking at Ronald Reagan, and starting in 84, 85, he runs again, obviously in 84, and he wins quite handily. But you can see more handling going on. We may not have seen it now, with Biden in the same exact way, because Reagan could pull it off. But we know that he was compromised. We know that he was in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's, and we know that his staff covered it up. So we know all that now. And so it just makes, I think, the media far more suspicious of the Biden administration, anybody who sort of experienced the Reagan administration, understanding how much can be, quote unquote, covered up with a president that may not be 100% on his game.
What are you watching? I mean, it's a blur. Paul's watching certain things. I'm watching certain things. Our heads are spinning over this. What is Professor Schiller watching tick by tick? What is the thing that focuses?
I'm looking at the difference between our daily lives and the functioning of the federal government and all this obsession with Biden's capacity. I understand it's a reasonable question to ask for an 81-year-old president who had a disastrous debate and shows signs of aging. There's no question it's fair game. But most Americans want to know, is the government working or is the government not working? And, you're talking about inflation. We sort of get a sense it might be easing. Things are slowing, but the economy is still pretty vibrant. The question is, does consumer sentiment shift in time to reward Biden for handling inflation or not? And I think that's really the big determinant. Age is a big deal in the media right now, but, is the federal government functioning? Yes, it is. Is it shut down? No, it isn't. Is he meeting with our NATO allies? Are we sending weapons where we need to send weapons in the interest of the United States? According to him, yes. So that's the big disconnect, is the media focus on this issue, whereas the rest of the country kind of experiences the federal government and says right now, except for inflation, it's working decently well.
Wendy, I think if you talk to, again, most Democrats, they would say, we'll back any candidate that is best equipped to beat former President Trump. Is there any consensus who that is today, or are we still trying to figure out whether it's President Biden or someone else?
Paul, that's exactly the right question, I think, to ask between now and November if Biden doesn't drop out. Who runs the Democratic Party? I've said before, the president is the, titular leader of the Democratic Party, being a Democrat and being in the White House. But basically, we don't have any big power brokers that can really seal this deal. And second, is chaos on the Democratic side, if he steps down, something that's going to counter chaos on the Trump side? Because right now, Trump doesn't look chaotic. The Republicans look unified. In fact, they're modifying their abortion stance in their platform. Their convention is next week. If it's disciplined and Trump stays on message and doesn't go off the rails, the Republicans look orderly. The Republicans look like they have the act together, and the Democrats look like they're a mess. So this is really the big problem for the Democrats. You say he will lose to Trump, but if you create more chaos around the nominee, I think you magnify or expand the chances that you will lose to the Republicans, because they will look, for the first time in a long time, more orderly than the Democrats.
Preview for us what you think the Democratic convention will look like, because boy, there are some crazy scenarios out there.
They should send us.
Yes, they should.
Yeah, the Democratic convention right now, the rules of the convention, and reinforced by state laws, are that the delegates pledged to Biden have to vote for Biden on the first ballot. They can risk, sort of being penalized or possibly criminalized if they don't, but that's the deal that we have now. Could Biden strategically announce, let's say 9 o'clock next Thursday night or something, maybe right when Trump is making his acceptance speech, that he is not running and that he's giving his delegates to Kamala Harris? He could do that. Or he could wait till the following Monday. And that becomes the news story, and that becomes the presumptive
This is brilliant. Wendy, I wish you could go on for an hour. Paul asked a smart question. It's a brilliant answer. If we get that, the former president's in his Milwaukee moment, the Democrats come out and say blah, 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 whatever to Harris, what will be the response of mainline Democrats? What will be the response southwest of Pittsburgh? What will be the response in West Virginia? What will be the response in Las Vegas of moderate, normal Democrats, not the elites?
I think it might be some trepidation, but a sigh of relief that you won't have chaos. You won't have protests in Chicago. You won't have, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren running around sort of figuring out who they want. You won't have the appearance of dysfunction. You'll have orderly succession. She's the vice president of the United States. Now, we ask me what they'll think in Detroit, in Pittsburgh, as you mentioned, in Philadelphia, in Georgia, which is not in play right now. But if Kamala Harris is at the top of the ticket for the Democrats, it's back in play. In North Carolina, more than 1 million Black voters. Ask me about those states if Kamala Harris is the head of the ticket, and what Democrats can figure out about voter mobilization, which they're not doing successfully now, but they could theoretically if she's at the top of the ticket.
Wendy, YouTube live chat lights up like a candle when you're on. Thank you so much. Wendy Schiller of the Taubman Center. Brown doing lots of new things in international relations with the leadership of Professor Schiller. Paul, where's the hottest, muggiest, stinking moment you've ever been in the United States? No, I've never been to Death Valley.
No, but I'll tell you, I think that the subway platform and the New York City subway is by far the
New Jersey Transit.
Yeah, just sitting there on the subway
Here's
platform.
mine quickly. I'm playing in Nashville. I got time. I go to a recording studio in Franklin I wanted to see, very famous. I won't go into it. South of Franklin is the Carnton Mansion, 1840.
Nice.
Extant. On the back porch, they laid out 4 generals of the Confederacy during the Battle of Franklin.
Yep.
It was mind-blowing in 98-degree heat. It was just extraordinary. Good morning, Franklin, Tennessee, in the heat wave. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures set to scale yet another all-time high as investors kind of await Fed Chair Jay Powell's testimony to Congress. It's actually his last scheduled address to lawmakers before the election. Now, ahead of it, we have NASDAQ futures up 0.3%. Dow futures little change, up 20 points. We have S&P futures up 0.2% or 11 points. The two-year yield 4.63%, little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.30%, and that's up by 1 basis point. We had some economic data points out this morning. First, U.S. small business optimism. It increased for a third straight month in June. It was the highest level this year. The National Federation Independent Business Sentiment Index advanced 1 point to 91.5 last month. Few companies making news. Nike, it's rehired its senior executive Tom Peaty to oversee its retail partnerships after sales dropped and also its seller relationships suffered. We have Nike shares up about 0.5%. And Paramount shares still lower, down nearly 1% right now. Looks like investors are a little worried about its agreement to merge with Skydance Media. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. This is a great joy. Craig Brandon joins us. And we could talk for an hour, Paul, about the magic of the municipal bond business and how two houses, Franklin and Eaton Vance, revolutionized the business years ago. Eaton Vance took a tax-advantaged study of it. It was so strong, so real, that Morgan Stanley took them out. And Eaton Vance of Boston, just absolutely definitive. Craig Brandon joins us now, running their muni bond shop. What's the biggest thing our viewers and listeners get wrong about tax-free bonds?
I think what they get wrong is that it's a fixed income asset class like all other asset classes. I think that the average investor thinks of munis as sort of your safe money, sleep at night, clip your coupon, tax-free. But we run a lot of active strategies where you can really take advantage of volatility in the market. And, we have opportunistic funds that move things around a lot. You can take credit risk in munis. I think in munis, you can take some duration risk and you can play market volatility, right? I mean, and there's not a lot of fixed income asset classes.
Well, you can take duration risk. Well, I wanted to go there and to translate this, folks. In the Paul Sweeney world, what are you looking at, Paul? Long durations, 2 years?
Oh, yeah.
2 years, something like that.
Yeah.
The trap in munis, to use Boston as the example, is mass housing, 20-year maturities. Do our listeners buy too long a duration, too long a maturity as a rule?
It depends on what your outlook is, and it depends on how long you're holding them for, right? I mean, more buy and hold investors, you're not worried about the volatility and you're sort of clipping your coupon, right? One of the things we're doing right now in some of our active funds, like the National Municipal Income Fund that I manage, is we're barbelling. So you can buy some bonds out there that have pretty long duration, but you're also getting paid on the front end. Now, when you're looking at munis, the middle of the curve is not super attractive right now. And I think the reason for that is, there's a lot of sort of rules-based money out there. There's a lot of money in the separately managed account world. And separately managed accounts in munis really don't like to go longer than 15, maybe 20 years at the longest.
Where are you, Paul?
Right?
You're at 50 years?
I ladder.
You got the
completely ladder.
The Trenton, New Jersey 50-year
Absolutely.
piece.
I'm all in
Paul
New Jersey.
knows so much more about Paul. Take over the interview.
Well, Tom, let me just put this out there for you, Tom. For New York City residents in the top tax bracket, I'm not sure if you know any of those folks.
No.
You can get a taxable yield of close to 9%, Tom. That is something I think is very attractive. Who owns these things? Who owns municipals by and large?
I think you see a lot of different organizations owning municipals. We're mostly retail, right? Versus other fixed income asset classes, we're more retail driven, I think, than others. But there's a growing business of taxable munis outside of the U.S. We manage about $1 billion for investors in Europe, investors in Japan, in Korea. They like the infrastructure aspect of taxable munis, right? We essentially, in the United States, we finance infrastructure in the muni market, which is different than other asset classes. So outside of the country, we're viewed as an infrastructure asset class, which is a little different. How in the U.S. we're just viewed as a tax-free alternative for fixed income. Banks and insurance companies. Actually, we talk about the election, right? Banks and insurance companies own generally, give or take, 25% of the tax-exempt muni market. When the corporate tax rate went from 35% to 21%, you saw banks and insurance companies pull back on their tax-exempt holdings. So we're really a retail-driven market. There is some institutional, but what we're really looking at is flows, technicals. We're really, really driven by technicals in the muni market.
All right, so what are flows doing here? I mean, you've got some really attractive. Well, you have attractive yields all across fixed income now. It's actually people will actually talk to you at a cocktail party these days because now you actually have returns and so on. Where do munis fit into a fixed income portfolio, do you think?
I say that all investors, regardless of what your tax bracket you're in, you should own some munis again because it's a total return asset class, right? I think that you need to not look at just the tax exempt income that you're earning, but also add them for total return. And like you said, the yields are very attractive right now.
I have trouble believing an individual can compete with Eaton Vance, Fidelity, and 7 other muni bond houses around a zip code of what we used to call the Green Beach in Boston over by Putnam. The answer is, how do individuals, when we buy a bond, somebody calls up and says, I've got the Aberdeen, Maryland GOs, AA+, I'm in Baltimore, let's say, I'm getting a Maryland thing there. How do I compete with institutions when I'm buying? I just don't get it.
I would say that that's a pretty good connection if you're finding, AAA, AA Maryland bonds, because those are really hard to find. So somebody knows somebody in the equation.
I'm not going to. If I'm David Rubenstein, owner of the Baltimore Orioles, I can't compete as an individual with Eaton Vance, right?
Right. It's access to bonds. It's looking at the market. The way I look at fixed income and the way I look at munis. Tom, you're a hockey guy, right? So. Football, you have your plays, right? You have your playbook and you have your plays. In munis, in fixed income, it's more like being a hockey coach where things change so fast. So if you're an individual investor, you're more buy and hold. We're looking at how the market changes. I mean, the market changes every day. Look, later today we have, the Fed chairman speaking in Congress. We have CPI coming out later this week. For active management, the muni market tends to be very correlated to treasuries because for the most part, it's a high-quality asset class with a little bit of duration in it. So, when the Treasury market moves, munis really move with it. And I think that as a retail-based asset class, retail moves when the Fed moves. So we talk about flows. We had a lot of outflows in 21, a lot of inflows in 21. We had a lot of outflows in 22. We've been sort of flattish for the last couple of years.
But what I want to know, when a broker calls up Paul's so large, he drives a Vespa. When Paul has like 6 brokers, and one of them calls him up, and I got a blah, 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 how much yield disadvantage does he have versus an institution? Because, Paul's only buying 100,000, 200,000 lots, but... how much is retail getting taken to the cleaners versus houses like you?
Yeah, I think that for a long time, retail pricing has been a little bit different than institutional pricing.
What does that mean?
I would say that the problem with retail is that you're buying small lots.
Yeah.
Right? And in munis, you get better liquidity and you get better pricing on $1 million and above if you're trading $1 million and above. So unless you're trading $1 million and above,
$1 million in one bond to get efficient pricing.
Correct. And when you're looking at retail, so I look in my own investment account, and I sometimes go and I look at the offerings that I see for munis, and it's not as good as I get institutionally, and I think that's driven by the fact that most traders in the industry want to trade million bond blocks. And if you're not trading million bond blocks, if you're looking at buying 50,000 or 75,000
your cell phone's lighting up like a candle.
Tony from
you
UBS.
Got 6 brokers on the phone.
Tony from UBS hooks me up with my munis here. So talk to us about credit quality in municipal bond market. I haven't heard, it's been forever since we've had a blow up.
Yeah.
I mean, Illinois or Puerto Rico, it's been a while.
Yeah. What you generally see are the big name blowups, right? The Puerto Ricos, the Detroits, the Illinois, the things like that. Muni credit's relatively stable right now. You have, there's some small parts of the muni market where you need to be careful in the muni market is the non-rated, right? And you don't hear about non-rated muni bonds. That's where the defaults happen. So you need to be extremely careful. Rated muni debt, muni debt, the default rate's extraordinarily low.
30 seconds left. You got ETFs now. Is active managed long-only mutual funds, is it a dying institution?
I think that depends on what channel you're looking in, right? Some of the sales channels want ETFs, and that's all they buy. Some of the sales channels are still buying actively managed 40 Act open-end mutual funds. So it depends on the channel. There is clearly a trend toward exchange-traded funds, which is why we're coming out with ETFs. And we're excited about our ETF business now. That is the trend, but it really is channelized right now.
Don't be a stranger. This has been great. The only reason we had Craig Brandon on, folks, is the Red Sox slaughtered the Yankees. I mean, it wouldn't have happened without their Craig Brandon's with Eaton Vance of Boston, and of course with Morgan Stanley Investment Management. Green on the screen with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. NATO leaders are gathering in Washington this week. Host President Joe Biden looks to make the case at the summit that he is still up for the job. A Parkinson's disease expert visited the White House, according to White House visitor logs. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre pushed back, saying the president is not being treated for Parkinson's.
The president, I can tell you, has seen a neurologist 3 times, as it's connected to a physical that he gets every year that we provide to all of you.
Bloomberg Political News Director for TV and Radio, Jody Schneider.
The White House is saying that this Dr. Kevin Kennard, a neurologist from Walter Reed, regularly visits the White House campus to treat military members who serve there, some of whom have neurological issues related to their service in the military. That is the explanation, but of course it raises questions, and the White House press corps seized upon these in this press conference with the press secretary yesterday.
Bloomberg's Jody Schneider. Donald Trump is getting back on the campaign trail. He is rallying voters at his flagship golf resort in the Miami suburb of Doral. Meanwhile, Trump says that he is yet to make a final decision on his vice presidential pick. However, he tells Fox's Sean Hannity he plans to make an announcement in the coming week.
I haven't made final decision, but I have some ideas as to where we're going. And a little bit, we wanted to see what they're doing. To be honest, I think probably within the next week and a half, probably sometime. I'd love to do it during the convention. My people say that's a little complicated.
Donald Trump speaking on Fox. The Republican National Convention begins July 15th in Milwaukee. Power has started to come back for some of the millions of homes and businesses left in the dark when Hurricane Beryl slammed into the Houston area. The weekend storm, which killed several people in Texas and Louisiana, has moved east to Arkansas. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thank you so much. Paul Sweeney, that was great. We don't do enough on muni bonds, and it's a huge, huge business because it's single tax, double tax, is triple tax advantaged. How can you say no to 7, 8, 9% pre-tax?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been a part of my portfolio just because, in a high tax state like New Jersey. But I think for a lot of people, it's really a nice piece of the portfolio.
The heritage of this, and those of you on YouTube, put the camera, Ari, on me if you can. And out back here is Eric Belchunas. He's still not in the building.
No, please.
Is the Museum of Bloomberg. And it's scary, the first Bloomberg terminal I used, how ancient it is. And the history of this, if people don't know, is you did it literally with a slide rule.
Yeah.
And then there was a thing called a Monroe Trader on your desk. I had one. I've had the privilege of looking at Bill Gross's Monroe Trader. And you figured out the movement of rates around time, which was duration and convexity. And then one day this box showed up.
Yep.
And it had a YA screen. And I remember looking at the YA screen, trying to figure out how many people I knew would be out of business.
Right.
And this was the revolution, folks. When we say Bloomberg Surveillance, it's what Mike Bloomberg and Tom Secunda did. And they invented the YA screen and the Horizon screen so you could do the math. Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. The S&P 500 futures, well, advancing, and this is after the benchmark set its 35th record for the year. We have S&P futures up 0.2%, 11 points. Dow futures, little changed, up about 29 points. NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, or 62 points. We have the two-year yield at 4.64%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.30%, and that's up 2 basis points. We head over to commodities. We'll check in with spot gold, which is lower at $2,357 an ounce. Brent crude, $85 a barrel. WTI crude at $82 a barrel. Commodities, dollar stronger, Japanese yen weaker. That's at 161.14 against the dollar. The euro weaker, British pound weaker. Bitcoin up 2% at 57,493. Few companies making news. DraftKings, not for good news, actually. New Jersey gambling regulators, they fined the company $100,000 for reporting inaccurate sports betting data to the state. Those shares, they're up about 0.3%, though. And if you're looking to save money on your next vacation, this new trend could help. It's called home swapping, when you let a stranger vacation in your home to get free lodging in return. Well, the Wall Street Journal says that platforms like Home Exchange and people like us, they're becoming more popular because of it. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
If you home swap, do they get the dogs?
Oh, that's a good question.
I don't know. We'll have to see. Lisa Mateo there. Thank you so much. Paul, the Heat. How the trains running? Pretty good.
So far, so good. Trains are running fine. Yeah. So we'll
but
see.
that's a testament to it.
It is.
I mean,
it's tough. I mean, but again, I've been riding New Jersey trains at 35 years, and for the most part, they get you back and forth safely, more or less on time. What else do you want?
Are you enjoying the new fare?
The ferry's great too. That's a great option.
fare. There's a new fare in the New Jersey trains.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. 15% increase in fares. Lisa and I, we just have to buck up and pay it, right?
Yeah, I know it's tough, but it hasn't been raised in a while.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's do this.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Daily look at the front page is the Lisa Mateo Hour, brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Thank you, Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers, they charge dollar margin loan rates from 5.83% to 6.83% rate. Subject to change. Learn more at ibkr.com/compare. Lisa, what do you have today?
All right, we're talking about the Silicon Slopes. This is in the Wall Street Journal. Because of the hot job market, there's a housing boom there now. And the Wall Street Journal saying tech workers, they're buying up homes. This is Draper, Utah. You're a skiing guy.
Yeah, this is out there in like Park City. Well, it's not Park City, but it's that
not
part
too
of the
far?
world. Yeah, the Wasatch Mountains.
Okay, so it has like a lot of open space, trails, parks, skiing, top schools, which is good for families. And it's not far from companies like Adobe. And it's really grown, but this also means that home prices are also exploding there. I mean, the priciest listing, about 10,000 square feet, you can pay about $7.33 million. But the insurance experts are saying just be careful because of wildfires, landslides, that can be an issue. So just check where the house is located.
Can you get insurance? Yeah.
Now, Goldman Sachs put a big facility out there, I'm going to say 10 years ago. And they have a lot of their tech people out there. So, and I know some young folks recently took jobs out there.
But isn't the heart of this debate that now it's just the elites buying it? Everything's all cash, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of job creation out there. So I think a lot of workers are going out there, where are they coming from? A lot of them from California,
right? Right.
And they've relocated.
Next.
Okay. A U.S. city has made the top 10 list of the world's best airports for 2024. All right. This is from Air Help. They looked at like on-time performance, customer feedback, quality of food, shopping. Coming in number 1. Hamad International Airport in Qatar. Number 2, Cape Town International Airport, South Africa. Number 3, Chubu Centra Air International Airport in Japan. But the real surprise was that the U.S. actually made that top 10 list. We're talking about Utah, right? So this is Salt Lake City International Airport. You've been there? I mean, it came in 8th worldwide, 1st in the U.S., and so it's been making these different kind of upgrades. Its last phase completed this fall, but it just goes to show that U.S. airports starting to get some attention.
It's a big deal. Like Kansas City built a new airport that they feel is vital for their growth, and I believe Kansas City is basically booming. And then we see it here. I mean, you've talked about Terminal A at Newark.
Yeah, and then JFK.
And LaGuardia.
Yeah, LaGuardia.
Can I say it's been transformed? I'd say it's almost transformed. It's like
it's a huge upgrade. Yeah, for the people.
Huge upgrade, and it's gone. Why can't we do this with trains? That's what I don't get.
Oh God.
Penn
Why?
Station.
I'm on a train in Switzerland.
Bless their hearts, they're trying it.
I'm on a train in Switzerland, and I'm going. I don't get it. If
you know
Switzerland can
you want
do
to see
this,
that? You want to see Switzerland? Go to Hoboken, New Jersey. That train station is very reminiscent of some of these European open air train stations. You can. It's really cool. Again, if anybody's in that part of the world, go do a little trip to Hoboken train station.
Next.
All right. This one actually stood out to me. So this is from Bloomberg Law. The rich, they want to make their wealth immortal. So estate attorneys, they're creating trusts that are aimed at extending the wealth until people, this is because they're getting cryologically preserved. So they can be revived even if it's hundreds of years later. So it's revival trusts. This is the new thing. It's an emerging area of law. They're starting to deal with it because cryogenic preservation is a big thing.
Wait. You
freeze yourself.
You're freezing your stock portfolio or yourself?
You're freezing yourself, but they're wondering what happens to that, stock portfolio after you're revived and come back.
So when I come back in like 100 years, I want to have my cash there with me so I can...
Exactly, but there's a lot of questions behind it. Like, can the money live indefinitely? Are you dead if your body is cryologically preserved? Are you considered revived if you only might have like your brain?
Is there any proof they can do that? And the answer is no.
It's tough.
And there's lawyers
there's a place in Arizona. I'm going through this here that has about 100 people frozen right now.
Isn't Ted Williams frozen?
It was just I have very strong opinions about that, and my hero, and I don't know what the details are. That was 12 years ago.
Yeah, but it's what happens to your money if
so
you
it's
do
not
come
going
back.
to my kids, which I don't know.
I mean, it's not a perpetuity. This is just bizarre.
This is what the world is coming to.
This is like what happens when Lisa's in 90-degree heat. Next.
And finally, this might come as a shocker, but McDonald's customers, they're not looking for the healthier options, okay? It was a recent conference. They said that their meatless burgers, the McPlant burger, didn't do well. Salads, they might bring them back. I didn't even realize they were gone. I mean, I guess I haven't been to McDonald's in a while, but they dished them in 2020, so they might come back.
When was the last time you ate at McDonald's?
Yeah, I guess since before 2020.
A couple months ago, we did this. You said you've actually had a salad at McDonald's.
I did, and that was the only thing I used to get.
Well, when was the last time you had a burger at McDonald's? Or anything like, or Burger King or any of the others?
I don't know.
I don't get them at the fast food chain.
Was it Monday or was it Sunday?
Yeah, exactly.
But their chicken is more popular. Actually, it's just as popular as their beef. So their chicken and their coffee. Those are like the two hot items from McDonald's.
You bring up a good point here. Let me do it. Folks, I'm doing this math quickly here. You can do that in the Bloomberg Professional Service. In the last 10 years, I'm enjoying McDonald's, even with a recent pullback, 13.4% per year.
Nice.
Which is better than nice.
Better than nice.
Is it Apple? No. Is it Magnificent Seven? No. But guess what? It's pretty much a straight line.
Yeah. I mean, where's that business going? It's not going anywhere. They're doing fine. I mean, even with the weight loss drugs, that was the call that people aren't going to, go to fast food, eat packaged foods. I don't know if that's a thing. I mean, I'm looking at the FA function for McDonald's. The street's got kind of mid-single-digit revenue growth as far as the eye can see for this company.
I just got an email from Sparta. They're talking. The senior manager was in a meeting. Of course, they got the radio on while they're in the meeting.
Yeah,
and
of course.
They're having a debate now whether they should freeze me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think they got to pay you while you're frozen.
That's what Mrs. Keene said.
Win-win.
Thank you. I guess thank you. That is the newspapers with Lisa Mateo.
Yeah, there you go.
I look at it, Paul, and I look at McDonald's. There's so much focus on the Magnificent Seven, but many of these blue chip stocks, like Lilly's in a lot of portfolios, and Eli Lilly. Good morning, Indianapolis.
Yep.
That's the Ozempic thing, right?
Yeah.
Farrow was way out front on that.
I mean, the last 5 years, compounded return, 54%.
Yeah.
Per year.
How's the Vespa? How fast you go?
Max is out at 40. So
40.
Matt Miller, I'm right with him with his Ducati.
You and Peter Fonda.
Yes,
You're on your Vespa. Steppenwolf at 40.
We were We can climb so high. I never wanna die. Born to be wild. Born to be wild.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr. We welcome all of you here on economics, finance, investment, international relations, and politics here, London, there, Paris. and back to Washington as well. Politics elsewhere around the world. NATO meetings coming up. Amory Horton really on top of that. Joe Matthew and Kayleigh Lyons, balance of power on that as well. Just, the ferment of the morning, folks, and we're trying to stay on, track here with futures up 11, the VIX 12.48. There's a nice tone to the market. Moments ago, and I mean like moments ago, Axios, Mike Allen just publishes with the summary of the people bouncing off the White House, like former President Obama and others. And Paul, we have Greg Valliere in this hour, David Gurulea. This is tangible right now.
It is. I mean, so again, as we've heard from the experts, we heard from Joe Matthew yesterday from Bloomberg. This next week is going to be critical for President Biden in terms of his public appearances.
And you go to the next week, which I take your point, and I guess that gets you what Terry Haynes is talking about, which is we need polling. We're starting to get a little bit of it, but mostly it's just like the stream of events. We'll keep you up to date on that across all of Bloomberg News. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by IBKR Financial Advisors. Switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interest at ibkr.com/RIA. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out on YouTube. That's the quickest way to get us with a really intelligent feed here. Everybody's all over Paul and the Vespa. One guy, does he wear a helmet?
Always.
You have to wear a helmet in New Jersey?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Do you need a special license?
No, you don't, because it's just like a little moped type thing.
It's like oh, really?
Yeah.
It's not even like a motorcycle?
No.
A Vespa's not a motorcycle.
It is not a motorcycle. The one I got, there are Vespas that are bigger motors, more powerful motors. Then you need the special
I'm learning every day. Lisa, you taking notes? I can see Matteo on a Vespa.
Yeah.
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
With our Bloomberg Business Flash from the Interactive Broker Studios, Lisa Matteo.
That would be nice. Good morning, guys. Well, futures still advancing in this after another record-setting day on Wall Street. The S&P 500 registered its 35th high of the year, so we have S&P futures up about 0.2%, 11 points. Dow futures, little change, up 31 points. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, or 68 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.64%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.30%, and that's up about 1 basis point. Economic calendar, busy week. 10 a.m. Wall Street time. Jay Powell delivers a Fed semi-annual testimony to the Senate Banking Committee. Tomorrow, he's back at it again. He has the House Financial Services Committee. Thursday, it's the Consumer Price Index for June, initial jobless claims for last week. And then Friday, the Producer Price Index, read on consumer sentiment, and also some big bank earnings from the likes of JP Morgan Chase. Shares of Boeing, that's where we're headed to next. They are little changed. The company in talks with the Defense Department to preserve its contract business. And meanwhile, another setback for Boeing. The FAA ordered airlines to inspect the oxygen generators, more than 2,600 of its 737 jets that were registered in the U.S. And finally, United Airlines says another of its Boeing aircraft, well, it lost a main landing gear wheel during takeoff. No one was injured. Those shares up about 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thank you. Joining us now, Sarah Hunt. She's with Alpine Woods, important investment management. And I got to believe, I think Lael Brainerd with economics at Wesleyan as well, it really prepared you to study artificial intelligence. I mean, you're a mere mortal. You're running a portfolio. Are you doing well? Like, you got a first six months statistic?
It's been a good year. We have several different strategies. We are ahead of the S&P in a couple, and about tracking it with a couple others.
So you're in the game.
It's been a good year. Yeah.
How does a mere mortal, including all of our listeners, study the future of AI, where one report is it's all fiction, Goldman Sachs with a note, it's all fiction, we're all going to die, and another one saying, who's the guy that dresses fancy in the colors?
Oh, Dan Ives.
Dan Ives. Dan Ives goes to the moon. How do you synthesize that if you're a mere mortal with parchment from Wesleyan University?
I think, a lot of what you have to do is look at what is going on right now. Right now, there's a huge spend to get the infrastructure in place to be able to utilize AI. The big question is what happens once you get that infrastructure into place. And I think that, to your point, that's the Goldman note this morning, which is questioning what is the outcome of all of this. I think in a lot of cases, the use cases will be are not necessarily what we're looking at now, but there may be a pause between a huge spend on the infrastructure and how those use cases play out. I think that's where the market would be more vulnerable. Right now, you have a big spend on the infrastructure, and right now, that's where people are putting all their time and energy, looking at things like NVIDIA and the companies, the data centers that will absolutely be helped by this.
Well, the discussion of AI brings us to maybe one of the biggest concerns for market watchers, which is the concentration of performance in this market and in a handful of names. SPX up almost 17%. SPY, the equal weighted, up 4%. That's not good.
Well, it's not. It just is, right?
Yep.
It's hard to evaluate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes narrow markets end badly, sometimes they don't. I think right now what you're seeing is the enthusiasm for a certain sector, but what that's also showing you is that the balance of the market hasn't run that fast, and so how expensive that is on a PE basis makes the rest of the market not look so expensive, which is what people are worried about. Those tech juggernauts are not cheap, and they remain not cheap because that's what people are chasing, but the balance of the market is not insanely expensive.
Do you see their CFOs at these tech juggernauts, as you call them, adjusting and taking use of cash if there's a stumble, if it's not as rosy as it is expected to be? Don't they have a huge amount of ammo and use of cash to support their share price?
Well, and this is also where they have a huge amount of cash to support the spend right now on that AI infrastructure. And that's why that's less of a concern, because you've got so many people who have so much money to spend that. And yes, they absolutely have so much cash that should this turn into something where they don't start to see a return or they start to worry about those returns, they've got room.
I mean, Paul, this is really important. There's a startup company out in Washington State called Microsoft.
Yep, heard of them.
They got $110 billion in cash from operations. Their CapEx has more than doubled to $40 billion. 110 take away 40 is a $70 billion free cash flow.
Yep.
So CapEx, as Sarah Hunt says, is ballooned, but their cash from operations is like a moonshot.
Yep. And the question is, for a lot of these big tech names, is what do they do with their cash? So, Sarah, let's say, Tom's all, and Lisa, they're all in the big 7 stocks. I, unfortunately, have missed that trade. Where do I go now? Do I look for other sectors? Do I try to find some value out there in the marketplace? Where do we go?
Well, I think that, like I said earlier, the rest of the market is not overly expensive, and I think that to the extent that you've had some correction in NVIDIA and you see these names do correct periodically, is to keep an eye on that. But it is all about the cash and about the cash generation, as Tom just said, and that is, I think, the biggest thing. The companies that can generate cash are the ones that people gravitate to, because they understand that means that whatever happens, they have the wherewithal to continue to move through whatever's going on economically.
All right, we're about to kick in, I guess, kind of Thursday into earnings mode once again. We've got some airlines coming out Thursday. We've got, obviously, the big banks, Jamie Dimon coming out Friday. What do we look for in this earnings cycle?
I think what we're looking for, the Q1, the bar was, people were concerned that a lot of the spending was not going to continue and there were going to be issues in Q1. Q1 was fine. The continuation, I think for the financials, you want to see stability and you want to make sure that things are okay there, even though you do have the yield curve not necessarily helping the banks out right now, but you just want to see progression, that there's nothing going wrong in any of those places, that you're not seeing deterioration in financials and credit quality and credit conditions, and that people can handle what's going on the financial front. I think you want to see progress in all of that. I think you don't want to see anybody warning big.
Tell me about healthcare. If I look at United Healthcare as the ginormous entity, it's flatlined for 18 months. Do you assume it gets back on multi-decade trajectory, or is there a new to healthcare?
Well, I think that the pandemic completely upended a lot of the healthcare spend. And I think that there was a rush into a lot of those stocks because a lot of people didn't actually spend that much on healthcare. So for something like United Health specifically, that was really great. Post-pandemic, there's a question of, okay, those valuations went very high. Are they worth it here? And do we need to look at what's going to happen going forward? I think it's still a question of how healthcare gets utilized. And I still think that we're not in what we would call a normalized environment post the pandemic.
I'm looking at the cash from operations. Paul, you ready for this? I said $110 billion on Microsoft. United Healthcare, I never would have guessed this, is 1/9 the size, $14 billion.
Wow.
110 versus 14.
Yep.
And yet I would have equated it as, say, half of Microsoft or something like that.
Yeah, extraordinary.
Every time Sarah Hunt walks in, I learn something.
Yeah.
It's like, great. Yep. Make it a daily thing, Sarah Hunt. Alpine. Alpine Woods.
Alpine Saxon Woods.
Excuse me. I got it. Well, there's a maybe it's my eyes. I don't know. I'm like the umpires of the Detroit Tiger games. They can't call balls and strikes. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The White House is pushing back on the questions of whether President Biden might have Parkinson's disease. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the details.
Logs had surfaced showing that a neurologist specializing in Parkinson's disease had visited the White House on several occasions. White House spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre saying that the president is fine.
Has the president been treated for Parkinson's? No. Is he being treated for Parkinson's? No, he's not. Is he taking medication for Parkinson's? No.
Jean-Pierre says the president had a full neurological workup as part of his annual physical in February, and there were no signs of any problems. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
It comes as President Biden is hosting a 3-day summit in Washington of NATO leaders. Former President Donald Trump is getting back on the campaign trail. He is rallying voters today at his flagship golf resort in the Miami suburb of Doral. Power has started to come back for some of the millions of homes and businesses left in the dark when Hurricane Beryl slammed into the Houston area. Houston Mayor John Whitmire says that one of the deaths attributed to flooding is a civilian employee of the police department who was called into work for storm duty but got stuck in road flooding.
Knew he was in trouble, called HPD friends for help, and I've been there all afternoon watching his colleagues retrieve his body from his submerged car.
Beryl has now moved east. A Massachusetts man can speak again after surgeons removed his cancerous voice box and replaced it with a donated one, a pioneering move. Marty Kenyon is the third patient in the U.S. and the first with cancer to undergo a larynx transplant and one of a handful worldwide. Kenyon is part of a clinical trial at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
You know, one of the great things about doing this show, you mentioned stuff. Like you and I were talking about hot places in the country, the worst heat I've ever felt was Franklin, Tennessee. And then they call in, and this is Alan from Franklin, Tennessee. Good morning, Alan. He's out on LinkedIn. And he says, we got to do a remote from the Stable Reserve Bar.
Oh, that sounds like my
Main
speed.
Street. Thank you for that's like the chocolate shop in West Lafayette, Indiana.
The
people
Stable,
say
was that?
The Stable, look it up, the Stable Reserve Bar.
Oh, that could be us. All right.
It's Stable Reserve Spirits, Franklin, Tennessee.
Yeah, absolutely.
Should we revisit in the next 20 seconds? Lisa, are you leaving directly from the show today to the airport?
I am, yeah, going straight from here. I fly out of Newark. I know, we're
Yeah.
in the city. I go back to
You
Newark.
got the Gulfstream into Newark?
I had to work a few things, but yes.
It's closer than Middletown.
Yes.
So it works out. Lisa Mateo, very important for
Hollywood,
Bloomberg LP.
in LA. with
In
beautiful
LA,
people,
it's
Tom.
a really important effort for Hispanic journalism, and she's leading our coverage there. Futures up 12 from New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures set to scale yet another all-time high. Investors awaiting Fed Chair Jay Powell's testimony to Congress. So ahead of it, right now we have NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 63 points. Dow futures, little changed, up 37 points. S&P futures up 0.2%, or 11 points. The two-year yield at 4.64%. That's up 1 basis point. We have the yield on the 10-year 4.29%, and that's up 1 basis point. Some economic data out this morning. U.S. small business optimism. Will that increase for a third straight month in June to the highest level this year? And we want to check in with shares of Paramount. Still lower, down about 0.5%. Looks like investors a bit worried about its agreement to merge with Skydance Media. We'll see if that changes. And then Nike. It's rehired its senior executive, Tom Peaty, to oversee retail partnerships. Sales dropped. Seller relationships have suffered. Shares of Nike down about 0.2%. And finally, Wendy's expanding across Europe. The company says it plans to open restaurants in Ireland and Romania next year. Shares up 0.3%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thank you so much, Lisa. This is something I've always done for years and years. He's had different jobs for Citigroup. But Stephen Whiting is the guy in an economic textbook, like The Beg is the one in London that I had at the London School of Economics, or, there's Mankiw or Krugman or Greg Mental Freeze. Up at Columbia University, Michigan, Rick Michigan's fabulous economic textbook. There's like chapter 23, which is folding the stock market into our economics. No one does it like Steve Whiting. I've said that for well over 10 years. He's chief investment strategist for Citi Global Wealth Investments, also their chief economist. Steve, you have prodigious chops. Where in the income statement into this earnings season is the greatest mystery for Steve Whiting?
Well, I think it's really the divergence between a few large cap tech companies and everything else. If we took a look back at the first quarter, our Magnificent Seven had pretty magnificent profit growth, 51%. We were slightly down for everything else. Now, of course, that included large drops in energy, materials, commodity sensitives, and some weakness in healthcare. And I know that you were on earlier with questions about that. That's a key one for us in this current quarter. Did we start to snap back? Did the healthcare sector improve in the second quarter? If it did, could really be a very good sign for the year ahead, for some broadening out in another secular growth area in the economy.
Steve, I'd say the Gloom Crew has gotten wrong margin resilience. If I look at a given tech company back, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years back, there's steady margin improvement. Is that game over?
I don't think it really is. I don't think it's V-shaped by any means from here. But, the basic story of the corporate sector taking a lot of hits and coming through it with good margins. And so much of the corporate sector has not been in a boom. I mean, there hasn't really been a boom away from a very narrow area of AI tech spending. And that's not even showing up as a technology boom in the aggregate. It's showing up in, a few companies contributing more than others. So I think there's a lot to still gain here. When I think about the year behind us, ex-Mag 7, US EPS was down 6.5%, down 7% across the world. Why can't we grow further into 2025? I really don't see a reason why we can't. The only question is how much is expected, whether these business costs in AI will increase competition in firms that have not been direct competitors before, the ones, where we have the highest level of confidence. You got to remember, 3 American companies are worth, closing in on 10 trillion. That's the entirety of all the value in all of Europe or all of Asia. So those are the questions, whether we have a little too much confidence in one area and not enough elsewhere.
Steve, what do you say to the folks that says, when you look at the concentration in the equity markets, as you were just referring to for some of the big tech companies, a lot of folks are just concerned that this is going to end really, really badly. How do you think about that concentration risk?
We're reasonably concerned about that, even as we're taking more equity risk in the aggregate. Again, we're a bit overweight on equities. Yields around the rest of the world outside the United States are allowing us to do that because of meager yields in places like Japan. This is, portfolio that we can add in the equity market. But we are actually fading this concentration risk and probably not getting as big a gain as we could if we were just concentrated in a few stocks. And there's a very strong history lesson here. If you were to just buy the largest 10 market cap company every year, those 10 best in the S&P 500 and hold that for a year, you would construct an investment that underperforms. If you look back at the late 1990s, the companies that performed best in that period, it were companies like Intel, and GE and Cisco were the best performing, largest market caps. Now, again, it took a lot of great performance to get them there, but they all didn't end up like Apple and Microsoft, examples of the top 3 companies today.
All right, so Steve, how about on the fixed income side? Because a lot of investors for the first time in 15 years are actually getting real yield, real coupons here. Where do you go in fixed income?
No, this is the good news. I mean, maybe there's concentration risk in the equity market, but there also is, a lot of growth at a reasonable price. And the other side of this is that we have income again, a second big pillar for portfolios. Look, I think bond yields at the long end of the bond market are not going to fall a great deal. Somehow, central banks convinced investors rates will be zero forever. And that was very, very painful. And caused the real terrible correction of 2022.
Right.
But the bond market is value, and now we can find yield opportunities to build portfolios with 5.5% to 6.5% yield without a lot of duration risk.
What's your GDP run rate right now? Are you on real GDP? Is Steve Whiting sub 2%?
No. So look, I think the second quarter may dip well below it, but if you think about just full year run rates, we'll be a little bit below 2.5%. So, our take on this is that the labor market did incredibly well in the last 2 years. Corporate profits were weak. We think that output is increasing. Again, I didn't say anything V-shaped, but the labor market is slowing. So this, strange place we find ourselves, and the reason why the equity market has performed so well and has given us double digits is that profits are growing and the labor market is slowing.
Stephen,
I think output can.
We have to leave it there. Stephen Whiting, thank you so much. It's the way to kick off earnings season. Sam Stovall and Steve Whiting together. That's really good. He's with Citi Global Wealth as well. I'm learning. We got a huge response. Good morning in Tennessee.
Yeah.
People listening down there. Franklin, south of Nashville. I looked up. I couldn't remember the studio, which was iconic, that I went to in Franklin. It was called Bennett House.
Okay.
It was Norbert Putnam and Keith Thomas, all sorts of famous. You remember Vanessa Williams Saving the Best for Last?
Yeah.
Recorded there. It was magical, historical, and it was a privilege to go there and gaze upon their excellence. But Paul, this just says Lisa Mateo. I mean, the Stable Reserve. It's a bar built around horse stalls.
Perfect.
Offering what's a tasting flight?
I think it's a number of glasses filled with different, beverages.
Like beverages or beers or.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they have that on the deck in New Jersey, right?
Yeah, of course.
And they have coffee-based cocktails, mocktails, seasonal cocktails, and upscale bites.
Wow, upscale
what
bites.
in God's name is an upscale bite?
I don't think that's not a pig in a blanket. I don't think.
It's not a pig in a blanket.
No.
Good morning down in Franklin, Tennessee. Thank you out on YouTube live chat for your comments there as we talk about the heat across this nation. And it's serious, Paul. I mean, the heat yesterday, I was in shock when I walked out on the deck.
Yeah, it's
yesterday.
for real. And
we don't have the dogs outside. We're keeping them indoors.
Yeah, keep them inside. I mean, and for the the folks moving around, it's tough out there. And it seems like it's across most of the continental United States. You just look at the map and there's not that much escape anywhere for it. So just gotta have to buckle down.
It ebbs and flows. I saw some, I can't remember, I think St. Louis is like 80 something today, not bad. But then it comes right back into the weekend. It is unique. This heat across the nation. Please be careful out there. It's a really pernicious thing, to say the least. Futures ebb away a little bit. We're +9 on the futures. NASDAQ up 0.3%. Futures doing better than yesterday is the way I'd sum that up. The VIX 12.46. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have futures pointing to a higher open. Investors awaiting Fed Chair Jay Powell's testimony to Congress for any clues on interest rates. Markets pricing the chance of 2 rate cuts this year, roughly a 70% chance of the first one in September. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures up 0.2%, 52 points. Dow futures little changed, up 14 points. S&P futures up 0.1%, 9 points. We have the bond market, the 2-year yield 4.64%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.30%, and that's up 1 basis point. Commodities, spot gold is lower, $2,358 an ounce. Brent crude, $85 a barrel. WTI crude at $81 a barrel. Shares of BT down 4%. BP down 4% in London after saying it's going to hit as much as $2 billion from impairments in second quarter results. And then sources say Saudi Aramco plans to raise at least $3 billion from its first bond sale in 3 years. Those shares down about 0.1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. The economic data, it is an onslaught. Today is the 9th, the 10th, a little bit of a ramp up. And then Thursday, Friday is just simply a wall of data. We're going to know somewhere in the vicinity of more Friday when Paul Sweeney's on at 10 a.m. Oh, excuse me, you're off Friday?
That would be correct,
Oh,
Tom.
I'll be
Friday
here.
in the summertime.
Friday in the summertime. The CPI,
That's what the kids
the PPI.
do, Tom. They work like 4 days a week.
Yeah, well, I'm working 6
out.
days. What can I say? It's like 7 days a week. I don't know. Ooh, I need 8 days a week. Okay, where am I here? Our economic indicators today and critically on Thursday and Friday. Always brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio, small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support in technology. Let me say that again. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support in technology. We thank Commonwealth for their commitment to our economic coverage. That's when we're strong. Steve Whiting just with us with Citigroup, and now we get ever stronger on economics from Nationwide. Kathleen Bestjancic joins us now. Kathy, are we a subpar, sub 2% growth rate here forward?
Good morning, Tom. Happy to be with you. We think so. We think that the economy is downshifting, and it's really broad-based. We saw that first in the May data with consumer spending and the savings rate rising. So consumers even getting more cautious by pushing up their savings rate finally. And then you see the ISM service index, that falling below 50. That's joining manufacturing in contraction. Now, that may be overstated on the downside, but then we get the payroll data on Friday, and really beneath the headline, there was softening in the labor market.
I look, Kathy, at the view forward, and I'm taught that a Fed is always ex post. They're always late. They're always after the fact. Is this a Fed that is now officially late?
It's risking that. I think you could make the argument they are late. There are signs, right, on the fringes of things slowing, and yet they're looking at inflation, which is a lagging indicator, right? And so that is problematic just in of itself. But understandable. We had the inflation scare right in the first quarter. It reaccelerated. Can understand why they're cautious and want to make sure inflation is really on the downward trend, eventually back to 2%. But the risk is here that they are too late. And our forecast is for a soft landing. The data so far have been consistent with that, but there's certainly, I think, heightened risk of a harder landing, especially if they delay further.
That's kind of where I wanted to go, Kathy, because I think the market seems to be discounting that soft landing, which you suggested. But, I guess you could read into this data and say it could be something harder than that. What's that risk, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's higher than normal. Any given time, you could have a recession because of external factors. But I think it is higher, and I think it's because the Fed may risk being too restrictive for too long. Think about it this way: the fiscal stimulus that really was the tailwind, and the pent-up pandemic savings, which were related to stimulus, have faded. So now the consumer is on its own 2 feet, right? And it's based on current income, what's coming in. And if the labor market starts to slow, and we're seeing signs of that around the fringe, then they've got to pull back. And they don't have that buffer of savings to rely on. And really, the consumer was the main locomotive of this economy. So that starts to sputter a bit. It doesn't take long for the overall economy to start to, flash red.
So let's kind of go to that consumer, because I guess it's kind of how you want to interpret the data, but it seems like the consumer generally has a job if he or she wants a job. Wages are, in fact, increasing in many cases faster than inflation. They're spending money. It seems that you could argue the consumer's still pretty strong.
I would agree. And again, our base case is that Fed will be successful and get the soft landing, but you see lower income households and lower middle income households are pretty tapped out on credit. That's what we see from the New York Federal Reserve survey. They're at the credit limits. There's no pent-up savings. And yes, wage growth is strong. It's outpacing inflation, which is good, but it's slowing. And again, we're seeing readings around the labor market. There's some, things are softening up. And that's why you hear from Chairman Powell, maybe we'll hear today, that they now see a dual-sided risk, right? It's not just about inflation, but they're worried about a slowdown in the labor market.
Let me rip up the script. Are you suggesting Chairman Powell could move the market today?
I think he certainly could. He has the potential at any time to move the markets, but I think this is a really critical, semi-annual address. We used to call it Humphrey Hawkins. But I think it's quite important today.
I look, Kathy, what you're talking about, and let's frame this out, folks. Sub 2% real GDP is one view. There's others that are more optimistic. And Kathy Bostjancic, you can parse that into domestic final sales and noise around exports, imports, the rest, China, blah, 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 in inventories, which I've never understood. If I got a sub 2% GDP, where does that put the interior growth of the country, domestic final sales?
It's softer. It's certainly softer. I mean, you're right when you strip out net export to inventories. Domestic demand was stronger, but that's really because the consumer, right? It was consumer really driving that. So it wasn't really business investments. But so if you start to see the consumer slow, so will find our domestic sales.
Okay, but
it's just
to parse this, Kathy. Michelle Meyer was on with MasterCard, and we all know she's got inside information from MasterCard. I mean, that's the game. She's way more optimistic on the American consumer. Parse the distinction between you and the consumer and those that are more optimistic about consumer spending. Are they just looking at the haves, like Paul Sweeney buying a Vespa?
Well, the haves, like Paul, certainly matter. There's no doubt. They account for the bulk of the spending, right? But the economy operates on the margin. And if you start to see a pullback in certain segments of the economy, and even, upper income households could start to curtail things if we see some continued softening here in the labor market. And, I'm not calling for any type of correction in the equity market, but if things pull back a little bit, that could also make, the wealth effect a little less dominant and people start to pull back. But again, our baseline is you will get the soft landing. I'm just trying to talk about the risk. And sub 2%, if people are above 2%, I think that's unsustainable because you can't really, the Fed will have to keep rates higher for longer to get inflation down. So you can't have it both ways. I don't think the Fed will be successful if growth continues to be above 2%.
And as you mentioned, if you're not long, if you don't own stocks or bonds or real estate, this inflation thing's really been tough on a lot of Americans. At the end of the day, the Fed can't do much about that, can it?
So the only thing they could do, not in real time, but all they can do, what Chairman Powell has spoke about, is bring inflation down. Like he sees that as the best relief for those households that aren't asset owners. Bring inflation down and get down to 2%. So ultimately, that is his goal, right? That's really what they want to accomplish. It doesn't mean that they won't adjust interest rates a little bit if they also see some softening labor market, because they would presume, well, inflation looks like it's back on a disinflationary trend, we get some softening in the economy, inflation will follow. That's kind of the thinking.
So again, bottom line, is this a Fed that needs to cut in September, do you believe?
I believe so, yeah. And I think the evidence is overwhelming, at least at this point. Now, if we get a surprise number on Thursday, that complicates things, no doubt. But if we get a 1/10, 2/10 increase, headline and core, I think that gives the Fed plenty of runway to start cutting rates in September.
Kathy, thank you so much. Kathleen Bostjancic with us with Nationwide. Paul, I was a little distracted there because I'm trying to sign up for the Vespa World.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can sign up
of course.
Can you see me and Michael Barr signing up for the Vespa World?
Absolutely. I see you guys in there, and who knows who's in that group?
There's a parking rack, like on the sidewalk outside at Lexington and 58th. Michael, could you see our tag team Vespas locked up there?
More for us is more like Hespas because that thing is going to be heaving, man. If I got to get
I think they've got a Detroit Tigers edition as well. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Biden has not undergone any special neurological testing since his annual physical in February, according to his doctor. The statement comes after a barrage of questions from reporters about White House visitor logs showing a neurologist and Parkinson's specialist visited the White House 8 times over the past year. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
We have had a comprehensive, and I just want to take another step back, comprehensive physical examination. The president has had that. We've given a comprehensive report. We've shared that the past 3 years. Every year that he has had this exam, he sees a neurologist.
Karine Jean-Pierre also said that there are no plans for Biden to take another annual physical until after November's election. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says rescue operations have stretched into a second day at a major Kyiv children's hospital struck by a Russian missile. Officials said 42 people were killed across the country and almost 200 injured in the daytime barrage that smashed into multiple cities yesterday. This morning, jury selection begins in the trial of Alec Baldwin. The actor is charged with felony involuntary manslaughter over the deadly movie set shooting in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson.
The key in jury selection is not to try and find people who have never heard of Alec Baldwin or have never heard about the tragedy on the Rust set. The key is to find jurors who can do their job, which is to look at the facts of the case and apply the rules to the facts.
It's been nearly 3 years since the Rust on-set shooting death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins. Baldwin was holding the gun when it fired, but maintains his innocence, saying he did not pull the trigger. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
All these discussions about earnings season. Paul, I said this last time. I sound like a broken record. But I was more engaged last time around than I'd been in years. And it's this tip point where, and in sigh relief, I guess it was okay. And this time around, I think Gina Martin Adams is saying, there's an optimism about earnings.
Optimism about earnings, and I'm going to really be focusing on, I think a lot of investors will be, Tom, on some of these big tech companies which have been leading this market in terms of their guidance. And it goes to that AI trade, which has been the story of 23. It's been the story of 24 to a certain degree. And what happens when an NVIDIA or someone else, gives a guidance number that's just not what the street was looking for? How at risk is the overall market to something like that? I don't know, but that'll be
I don't
key.
know. I mean, where we are, it's not Nifty 50 1960s. It's something absolutely original. We had green in the screen, now red in green in the screen. A tape deterioration right now. Futures up 8, but Dow goes negative. NASDAQ still up fractionally 0.3%. In the yield space, the Sweeney yield 4.64% on the 2-year yield. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. S&P 500 futures, well, still advancing, and this is after the benchmark set its 35th record for the year. Those futures up about 0.1% or 8 points. NASDAQ futures up 0.2% or 50 points. Dow futures now little change, down about 2 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.64%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.30%, and that's up 1 basis point. We have spot gold lower, $2,357 an ounce. Brent crude lower, $85 a barrel. WTI crude, $81 a barrel. To currencies, the dollar stronger, Japanese yen weaker, 161.15 against the dollar. Euro weaker, British pound weaker. We have Bitcoin up nearly 2% at 57,352. Companies making news, that would be Pfizer. It's replacing its longtime chief scientist after a more than 15-year career with the company. Those shares are little changed. And the U.S. corporate earnings season, that kicks off on Friday. Results from big banks like J.P. Morgan Chase. Now, ahead of this, Reuters reporting the Federal Reserve considering making changes to the way it calculates global bank surcharges. And that change, well, it could save the country's 8 largest banks combined billions of dollars in capital. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene with Greg Vallier of AGF Investments. And to give you the background here, folks, Mr. Vallier puts out a note. It's shockingly early in the morning. Like, I think he's on.
What's he doing?
It's like he's on Helsinki time or something. Sun's up. And it's read voraciously on Wall Street, and it means it's a 3-hour conversation this morning. Let's get started. I want to go away from the Biden analysis, the Wall Street Journal article, Greg Vallier, devastating. Axios, Mike Allen out with just a summary that's just, it's shocking to read from an historical, American perspective. What should the Republicans do? Nobody's talking, Greg Vallier, about what the Republicans do. Do they just zip it and be quiet?
Yeah, they do. I think that, Donald Trump, who usually is his own worst enemy rhetorically, has handled this right. He hasn't gotten involved in it. I think they want to focus on the vice presidential running mate and not really go after Biden. That'll come later in the fall.
I mean, should the former president go out now? Forget about Walter Reed. Call up Weill Cornell in New York. I don't care, some major medical institution, Emory or whatever, and say, forget about this. I'm going to get a major physical done. I mean, was that like politically expedient for Donald Trump right now?
This was handled so poorly. I have no idea what the real story is with this expert on Parkinson's. There have been so many versions of the story. But you're absolutely right, Tom. I think that Joe Biden should say, I'm having a thorough physical, case closed. But he is not, and because I think he has an illness.
I'm having a physical.
Sure.
I walk in, it's at Weill Cornell.
Exactly. They take care of you.
Yeah, they do.
So, hey, Greg.
They're going to freeze my body.
Yes, and freeze your assets as well. Greg, what's really a realistic timetable for President Biden, for the Democratic Party, to really make a final decision? Or do we end up going to an open convention?
Heart of the matter.
Yeah, I think we go into August. I've got to say, in the last 48 hours, I think that Biden has maybe stopped the bleeding, that things are looking a little bit better for him. But my concern all along has been that there's still a likelihood of another health incident, another gaffe. I don't think we're out of the woods yet. I think there could be more of that. And really, the bottom line for me is that, does anybody really think that Joe Biden can serve as president for another 4.5 years? I don't know anybody who believes that.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the question then is, I'm not sure who the president's listening to. Do we have any idea here? Because he does not appear to be listening to...
That's what the Wall Street Journal article goes
Exactly.
Yeah.
Who's he listening to, do you think?
Well, Hunter, Jill, people who are close to him at the White House, a few members of Congress. But I think Joe Biden has a suspicion of Congress now. I don't think he trusts them. I think it's a very small group at the White House.
Tell us about the independent analysis. I've seen some, Terry Haynes, Greg, is really strong on we need to see polling done. polling is percolating, and, I guess it takes time, and we're going to get that. How big is the independent, undecided vote in America? I saw one number. It's only 18% or even less. How big is it?
I don't think it's as high as 18%. I think it's very low. And I think, there's been a really interesting phenomenon. The polls haven't moved much. They didn't move after the guilty verdicts. Astonishingly, they didn't move after the debate. I think most people have made up their mind. I mean, there are still some independents who will break in October, but I don't think there's all that many of them.
What's the convention look like? I mean, when is Milwaukee's like, Lisa, when is Milwaukee? Like, you fly to Hollywood and you're going straight to Milwaukee then after that, right?
I don't think
Greg, July 15th, thank you, Rich. Are you going to Milwaukee, Greg Vallier?
No, God, no.
Why, Greg Vallier? Good morning, Wisconsin.
Yeah, I don't see that as all that fruitful. It'll be interesting. You know what I was thinking this morning? Everybody has got it down to three candidates: the governor of North Dakota, J.D. Vance, and Marco Rubio. What if there's a fourth? Nobody has talked about. What if there's a fourth like Glenn Youngkin? I'm not totally ruling out one more name popping up in the next day or two.
So, Greg, James Carville had an interesting essay in the New York Times yesterday about suggesting how the Democratic Party could select another candidate involving the former presidents of Biden and Clinton, some town halls to really flesh out who in the Democratic Party should be on the ticket here. What do you think about some process like that? If there is an alternative to a Biden incumbency, how do you think it might play out?
You'd have to see the details on that. It could be difficult to pull off. There could be a lot of resentment that people who voted earlier in the year are being ignored. To me, that's a tricky one. I mean, there's only three people, in my opinion, who could be the next president: Biden, Trump, and of course Kamala Harris. I think those are the only three.
Why can't you get the free for all? I mean, a lot. I'm not saying I don't want to editorialize here. That's inappropriate. But Greg, there's a lot of people out there talking about a speed debate. Like 6, 7, 8 people on stage. Is that just about money? I mean, is it just tens of millions of dollars that get all messed up?
Yeah, I think some of it's money. Some of it is just, trying to get some publicity at the last moment. But I feel very strongly there's only those three people who are likely. And I don't rule out Kamala Harris because I don't rule out more Joe Biden health issues.
Greg Vallier, thank you so much. A brief on a cacophonous Tuesday, to say the least. I can't say enough. I'm not even retaining it all, but really good journalism and sourced. People are killing themselves to say these are the sourcing that we have, because it's all, bottom line, Lisa, help me, it's all gossip and innuendo.
Gossip.
It's like Michael Barr's life, it's a gossip and innuendo. But the answer is everybody's trying to source like crazy, Paul.
Yeah, and I think I guess as we heard from Terry Haynes yesterday, it's, again, this week and starting right now with the NATO conference, Tom, is going to be important how the president performs. He did have his ABC interview last Friday, which some people said was okay. Some people said not so much so. And then we've got some events next week.
I got 30 seconds. I called Jane Fraser up last night. I said, what in God's name is Bassinet doing? Jason Bassinet just publishes on Paramount. He has a buy.
Yep.
Skydance reached an agreement. This in turn implies, absent the cash component, it's 6 times EV to EBITDA. They're giving this thing away, Paul.
Yep, this was a double-digit multiple not too long ago with a lot more EBITDA as well here. So a lot of value destruction for this company, as well as we've seen from a lot of other legacy media companies. Okay. And so, here you are, Sherry Redstone selling out. We had, Rupert Murdoch 5-6 years ago sold, and that's it.
So your Vespa, can you have a rider on it? Like
Sure.
Lisa and you tool around?
Absolutely.
You can do 2 seats.
2 seats, yep.
We had a huge response. We played Born to Be Wild, Peter Fonda. I mean,
of course.
See
Paul, zooming around the Jersey Shore.
Zooming around. And, do they have a radio? Like, can you play tunes?
No, but they have a phone charger thing in the little compartment. So if you need to charge your phone, you can do that.
You can charge your phone, and then you can listen to George Thorogood.
Yes, you can.
Bad to the bone. I mean, I can see Sweeney on the Vespa with the black leathers on.
I don't think so.
spoke up, said leave this one alone. She could tell right away that I was bad to the bone. Bad to the bone. Bad to the bone. Bad. Bad.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, and Kathleen Bostjancic at Nationwide. She said it. She says Powell may be interesting in 1 hour.
Yep.
we get a statement from Powell, and what the conversation is he may finally nudge to say, hey, it looks like 2% real GDP. We got to shift.
Yep. And, again, that's where nobody's expecting any movement here, but just some guidance about how maybe the Fed is thinking about its rate structure. Again, some of the market discounting a September rate cut. Others think they can push it off to maybe December.
Well, that's the parlor game we've been playing here. But the answer is the real economy speaks. In the labor market, the fact is it's deteriorated. I mean, that's just a statement.
Yep. So the market, I think the labor market it's weakened. It's slowed. It's still relatively robust, certainly with just 4.1% unemployment rate. But if the Fed is looking for reason to potentially cut rates, they could look at some of the labor market. But again, Tom, the CPI data Thursday is going to be key.
On Android Auto, good morning. On Apple CarPlay, 20 nations worldwide. International Apple CarPlay coming out, I'm told, with a redo in September, October. On Apple CarPlay, good morning. And, of course, on YouTube, we've been absolutely humbled. I just got in the June data on YouTube, and we are humbled by the turnout. Thank you. You subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. That's the number one thing to do. You go to YouTube, and you can watch it. You don't have to subscribe. But if you subscribe, it becomes a habit, and you get all the other Bloomberg stuff as well. Lisa, are you going to broadcast from Hollywood? I mean, are we doing a remote?
Am I going to get the phone call at 7 in the
3 a.m., 3 a.m. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
Lisa going out with Carolyn Gage and all of Bloomberg News to a very important conference in Hollywood. She's going to, but you're going on the Gulfstream, so it works out.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
exactly.
not in Middletown. That's okay. As well, green on the screen, a nice lift to the market, and it continues. It's ebb float, but I'm sorry, there's a bid to the market with the NASDAQ up 0.3%. Again, we're on YouTube. Search for Bloomberg Podcast. A beautiful, really informative live chat out there. Thank you particularly to the gentleman from Franklin, Tennessee, for some wisdom from the South today. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. Yeah, futures advancing after the S&P 500 registered its 35th high of the year. So we have S&P futures up 0.2%, 11 points. Dow futures, little change, up 15 points. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.3% or 63 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.63%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.29%, and that's up 1 basis point. And yes, we are just under an hour away from hearing Jay Powell's testimony to Congress for any clues on interest rate cuts. Continues tomorrow. He speaks to the House Financial Services Committee. Thursday, we get a look at the Consumer Price Index for June, initial jobless claims for last week, and then it ends off on Friday, the Producer Price Index, and some big bank earnings, too, from the likes of JP Morgan Chase. Shares of Boeing, they're little change this morning. The company in talks with Defense Department to reserve its contract business. And meanwhile, United Airlines, they say another Boeing aircraft, well, it lost the main landing gear wheel during takeoff. No one, thankfully, was injured during that. Shares are up
like
about
a wheel
10%.
fell off the plane?
It just fell out during takeoff. Yes, landed safely, though.
That's important.
That is exactly. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom and
They
Paul.
probably can land the plane if one wheel falls off. I mean, they got enough redundancies.
Yeah, I would think so.
But still, this is always fun with Omar Aguilar. He takes a different approach to the market. I grew up in a household of actuaries. And all you need to know is back before computers, there were slide rules. And these guys were important because they tried to figure out the future. Omar Aguilar is an actuary. He is with Charles Schwab and does great market strategy, looking at passive equity and multi-asset strategy. Omar, what's our view forward here, looking at the actuarial assumption of the market? Do we need to lower our prospects and say we're not going to average 7% a year, that we're going to average 6 or 5.5%?
Good morning, and interesting. Yes, I did go to school back when I was getting my college degree when I was still coding in Fortran 77, and I was still doing punching cards for trying to do.
Did you ever drop the card? Come on, did you ever drop the cards on the floor?
Yeah, I did, and it was a disaster trying to go and get it back on. But we have come a long way when you think about those days, relative to all the technology that we have today and all the chips and everything that we have been discussing on AI. It's been clearly a different markets. But going back to the question, I do think that we're in a very a well-known situation in terms of life expectancies, and that's a lot of what actuaries do, is just understanding how, economic and societies will actually adapt to the fact that, people are living longer, and definitely the cost of healthcare continues to get higher. And unfortunately, a lot of people do not have enough savings to be able to withhold, what is going to be a long-lasting, life.
Omar, how concerned are you about this equity marketplace, the makeup of this equity marketplace, that so much value is in so few stocks, that the breadth of this market maybe isn't what a lot of folks would like to see? How concerned are you about that?
We are, constructive on it, Paul. I think, the reality is that the concentration in the market, it's kind of a cliche to say that this time is different, but it does feel different because those, heavy technology and names that are driving a lot of the price movement in the market, they're also fairly stable, and they have a significant amount of cash flow, and they have significant amount of what is called a stability. If you go back in history, a lot of the heavy concentration in the market ended up being in areas where you don't necessarily, thought that those markets or those particular sectors and stocks will potentially, be giving you what you have. It was just a promise. When you think about the makeup of the market today, even with those high level, high market cap companies, they have a significant amount of free cash. So they generate earnings that they continue to have. The question is whether or not they can continue at the same pace. The answer is no, which means that there's opportunities in other parts of the market to be able to catch up and be able to just, provide a little more potential upside than what you have in those, heavy technology names that are at the top of the market.
All right, I'm all in the mood to catch up here. Where do I go to catch up in some of these, maybe these sectors that have been underperforming some of the big tech names?
Yes, and this is a lot of the work that we're doing now with our clients here at Schwab, which is, this is the perfect opportunity for you as you have in the middle of the year to do a reassessment of portfolio construction, because whether the clients like it or not, because of the momentum and because of the growth in the market, there are natural exposures that have been in most portfolios. Most clients tend to be overexposed to the US. Most clients tend to be overexposed to technology. Most of the clients and portfolios will tend to, have a more cash than what they probably need to have in their portfolios. So we continue to work with the clients to redeploy the cash, to just extend duration in their fixed income portfolio, to make sure that they reduce the amount of credit exposure they don't necessarily need to have to generate the income they want. And then on the equity side is to redeploy, from the winners into areas that will probably benefit from changes in monetary policy that may happen in the next, few months.
Do you have an analog back? I mean, can you say 2023, 24 out to 25, 26 has an analog with another time and place, Omar?
Well, it looks a lot like, it was in the late 90s. If you actually just chart the different parts of the market, particularly when you think about the NASDAQ, when you think about the equity market. Now, the big difference is that the interest rates and the real interest rates, back then compared to today, this is definitely not in the same camp. And when you think about inflationary pressures and you think about the economic cycle, it was in a very different, part of the market. So it's very hard to pinpoint the exact conditions of what we have in this cycle relative to prior cycles, mostly because of the pandemic. And I think if you think about what we've been discussing for the last 2 years, the idea of these rolling recessions followed by these rolling recoveries, we have never had that before. So it is hard. Technically speaking, yes, the market may look a little bit like the late 90s, but when you think about economically and even just earnings-wise and capital expenditure-wise, it is different than many of the times in history.
Omar, thank you. Omar Aguilar with Charles Schwab. Thank you so much. Nice rebound of the market, green on the screen. We got to get the market open in 20 minutes with the VIX, 12.42. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Biden is getting an unexpected boost from progressive in Congress on whether he should drop out of the race over acuity questions. Those same progressive members of Congress, like New York's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who once criticized the president for negotiating with Republicans, are signaling that he should remain at the top of the ticket. Representative Ocasio-Cortez.
Joe Biden is our nominee. He is not leaving this race. He is in this race, and I support him.
In the Senate, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer also backed the president, saying, quote, "I'm for Joe." It comes as NATO leaders are converging on Washington for their annual summit. Bloomberg's Nancy Lyons reports.
President Biden is hosting the event that marks the 75th anniversary of the alliance. White House National Security Advisor John Kirby says the leaders are expected to share their thoughts on Ukraine's future.
Some discussion about Ukraine's path to NATO and what that can look like, and a reaffirmation of what the president has long said, that NATO is in Ukraine's future.
Kirby says President Biden has helped strengthen NATO with 2 new members since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Finland and Sweden, bringing the total to 32. In Washington, Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
Former President Donald Trump is getting back on the campaign trail. Today, he is rallying voters at his flagship golf resort in the Miami suburb of Doral. A Massachusetts man has been given the gift of speech again. This is really something. Marty Kedian underwent a larynx transplant at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. He is one of a handful who have undergone the trial surgery and the first to get the surgery after cancer. Kedian says this surgery allowed him to speak to his 82-year-old mother again.
I want people to know this can be done, and it's a process, but it's worth it.
Wow. The surgery will allow people to breathe, swallow, or speak on their own. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
I learn things every day. Do you know that a while back, the Detroit Tigers had not one but 2 people excelling at the All-Star game? Did you know Verlander and Scherzer played for the Detroit Tigers, Paul?
Way back in the day. Okay.
I mean, they were weaned and groomed and excellent at the Detroit Tigers. And there's this major uproar now because as the Detroit Tigers have another stellar season, you have a pitcher, Michael Barr. Mm-hmm. Do you pronounce it Skubal?
Yes.
Skubal, is he the best pitcher in baseball?
He's one of the best. And I listen, I know I give my guys a little ribbing here or there, but you know I am totally behind the Tigers. And yeah, he is one of the better ones. I mean, to be voted to the All-Star team, that's saying something, and a salute to him.
He's the first pitcher, Tigers pitcher in 100 years to strike out 12 with no walks.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, that's like back when you were watching a game.
Well, that's back when I had black hair and the lawn was all up there on top of my head. Yeah.
Verlander and Scherzer, they're still playing, right?
Yes, sort of. Yeah.
So, okay.
That's
your obligatory Detroit Tigers All-Star game, Gab. Does anybody care about the baseball All-Star game? I haven't watched it in years.
Oh,
no.
Boy.
Rich, be careful. He's talking about shade on the Detroit Tigers. Do you watch the All-Star game?
No.
I don't watch it.
No.
Michael, do you watch it?
I love the home run derby.
Home run derby.
Okay, there you go.
That's like my ute. There you go. Futures up 11. NASDAQ up 0.3%. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures set to scale yet another all-time high. Investors awaiting Fed Chair Jay Powell's testimony to Congress. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 65 points. Dow futures, little change, up about 12 points. S&P futures up 0.2%, 12 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.63%. That's little change. The 10-year yield at 4.29%, and that is little change. What's moving the markets? Chipmaker Intel shares up nearly 3%, set to extend gains for a 5th consecutive session. That's the company's longest winning streak since January. Paramount shares still lower, down nearly 1%. That was after it announced its agreement to merge with Skydance Media. And finally, online pet retailer Chewy, its shares lower, down 2%. And Argus research analyst, cut her recommendation to hold from buy. That's the reason why those shares are lower. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and
Is
Paul.
Chewy a meme stock, or are we back to where it's like a normal, what's Chewy doing kind of
I think it's back to a norm. I don't think it's a meme stock, Chewy. I don't think
Of all the websites I deal with, it's the easiest one to take my money.
And that's saying something.
Everyone out there that does websites, copy Chewy. It's breathtaking how quickly they could take $112 and
in a little box. It comes delivered.
I can say the same thing about Penn State University.
That racket. Oh, yes. Remember, you used to have to write out a check. You get the quill out. You dip it in the ink. And, you could be 3 days late. Oh, it's in the mail. And now it's like digital.
Yep.
And then they come after you. They want the sports contribution as well.
Exactly.
After this is a joy. If you're Jan Hatzius with all the heritage of Goldman Sachs economics, going back to Ed McKelvey and a guy named Dudley now, or was it the New York Fed, I should say, and Jim O'Neill in London and all. It's about hiring people. And one of them is David Mericle, joins us right now with Goldman Sachs, with prodigious economics and critically the dynamics of statistics at a small school up in Boston by the name of Harvard. David, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I want to combine in the dynamics of statistics into the economic guess of Goldman Sachs. The shadows that are out there right now, the uncertainties, as Elarian would say, the unknown unknowns, are they quantifiable now, or are you guessing into the future?
I think, obviously from month to month, there are ups and downs in the data. In the inflation data this year, notably, there were some firmer prints at the start of the year that I think exaggerated things a little bit. Last month, we had much better news that maybe exaggerated things in the other direction a little bit. But, broadly, I think if you kind of step back, the labor market's rebalancing, inflation's coming down, the Fed's getting ready to cut rates. And so, while not every print kind of makes sense month to month, big picture, I think things are evolving in a way that's kind of reasonably in line with what you would expect based on economic principles and kind of what we're looking for the year. Further, if not definitive progress on inflation and the beginning of a rate cut cycle in September.
To go to your statistics background, the financial media loves to do Nassim Taleb 101 and talk about the tails, the right tail, the left tail, the mystery, the uncertainty that's out there, 1, 2, 3, 4 standard deviations out. What is your left tail concern right now? What's the worry when you're in meetings at Goldman Sachs on this nation's economy?
I wouldn't say there's anything that looks like that big of a risk, but I think the most obvious thing to keep an eye on is that the unemployment rate has come up. On a 3-month average basis, it's up 0.5 percentage point. As Chair Powell said last week, that leaves us in a place with unemployment just a hair above 4. That is great by historical standards. But I would think you certainly don't want that to rise any further. Now, the reason I'm not that worried about it is that the Fed has a lot of room to cut interest rates if things do deteriorate further than they already have. I think that would be quite unnecessary in order to solve the inflation problem, which at this point is just a matter of waiting for lagged effects to go away. I think the Fed shares that view. And so, one pushback to this risk, and I think to many risks, is that if they do materialize in a more damaging way, the Fed is now at liberty to cut.
So by that, I guess, rationale, David, is it more likely in your opinion for the Fed to wait here and maybe wait till, I don't know, December or something like that?
Obviously in June, we saw that opinions were pretty mixed on the FOMC, with 11 people looking for one cut or less, which could mean December, and a minority, 8, but one that I would guess includes the leadership looking for 2. My guess is that if the inflation numbers come in the way we're expecting this month and the next couple of months, we're looking for 21 basis points on core CPI this week, that the combination of better inflation news, an unemployment rate that's now risen, half a point or so, and a chair who last week signaled that he sounded like he was ready to cut and maybe was willing to push a little bit for that will add up to a cut in September.
David, how do you feel about the U.S. consumer here? There's a lot of concern out there that there's the haves and the have-nots, and maybe that divide has never been more pronounced than it is today, particularly in a world with higher inflation. How do you think about the consumer? How do you think the Federal Reserve thinks about the U.S. consumer?
Yeah, look, from my perspective, a lot of the more pessimistic views have been overcomplicating things the last few years. We've had this year, as last year, solid real income growth. We have record strong household balance sheets. That, to me, looks like it was a pretty straightforward combination and recipe for solid consumption growth last year. It's not going to be as strong this year because job growth is slowing. Last year was exceptional. We had people coming back into the labor force. We had a big immigration surge that now seems to be slowing. So I think we're basically seeing a watered down version of last year's story, right, where those strong fundamental drivers give us solid consumption growth. I'm not that worried about some of these concerns that you raise. It's always the case that right, wealth, income, and consumer spending are distributed unequally. I don't think the current environment is that unique in that respect.
David, on a sleepy 90-degree day in Washington, where everyone's focused on the President of the United States, the NATO meetings, the Red Sox ascendant over the Yankees, David, is this the time for Powell to drop a bombshell in this testimony to really signal a shift in the vectors they see out there?
I don't think so. I think it's a time for him to repeat what he said last week, which is that they are making progress on inflation, that that he worries, as I worry, that any further deterioration in the labor market could raise unemployment more meaningfully, and that would be a shame and unnecessary. And that as if you kind of read between the lines, that as a result, as I interpret it, he sounds maybe a little bit more ready to cut than at least some people on the FOMC. That's what he said last week. That's what I would look for this week. Nothing definitive because there's still a lot of data before that September meeting.
David Mericle, thank you so much. With Goldman Sachs, working with Jan Hatzius over there. I couldn't crowbar out of him some tension. They think they're pretty much on plan.
Yeah.
They're just looking at the data and seeing what's going on. And again, I think it really speaks to everybody's in moderation. This word solid keeps coming up. It's a solid economy, even if there's, look at the market again today. Yep. When was the last time the market went down like 3%?
No, exactly. I mean, we
not
had
in one day, but give me 3% over 3 weeks.
I mean, April was the last time we had any kind of pullback in the market here, and the market seems to be fine with the expectation of a rate cut, whether it comes in September or perhaps even later. Just having that expectation out on the horizon. And solid earnings. Let's underscore the earnings here. So we're going to get a lot of data points over the next several weeks.
We're getting a huge response on this as well. I mean, I assumed you're getting a vest because of Greg Peck and Audrey Hepburn and Roman Holiday. What was the movie? Don't give me this Steve McQueen Great Escape stuff. Was it Charlton Heston that put you over the top? Or
no, you
was
know what it was? It was a photograph.
Theory? A photograph.
An American girl in Rome, I believe. And there's a bunch of, post-war Rome. I just looked like it was in the 50s. A bunch of guys just hanging out in the corner at a cafe. And, one guy was just kind of looking pretty cool sitting on a Vespa. And they were, ogling this, I guess, attractive young gal. So, as they tend to do in Italy, I guess.
So you felt you could go out, what was it, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 because you looked at a photograph?
Exactly.
In 1950. It's nuts. Can you give us a song like Midlife Crisis?
Exactly.
Folks, I'm insanely jealous. I'm in awe that Paul did this. For those of you just joining us, Mr. Sweeney, the shores of New Jersey in a Vespa. We need to get the markets open. Futures lift. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. Now, we are just about a half hour away from hearing Jay Powell's testimony to Congress. It's his last scheduled address to lawmakers before the election. Bloomberg reporting he may strike a more dovish tone after unemployment crept ahead of Fed projections. Now, we'll soon find out. Stay tuned right here because Bloomberg will carry it live. Let's get to the markets ahead of all of this. Right now, the S&P 500, let's start there, up 0.2%, 11 points at 5,583. The Dow, little change, down about 24 points at 39,320. We have the NASDAQ up 0.3%, 64 points at 18,470. We have the 2-year yield at 4.63%. That's a little change, and the yield on the 10-year 4.29%, and that's up about 1 basis point. We go to commodities. We have spot gold higher, 2,363 an ounce. We have Brent crude at $85 a barrel, WTI crude at $81 a barrel. At the open, I also want to check in with shares of Intel up just over 2.5%, nearly 3%, set to extend those gains for a 5th consecutive session. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thank you so much. So what we're going to do here, David Gura joins, of course, The Big Take, doing hugely well on an Apple podcast. Look for that on any number of themes. Right now, frankly, in his world, there's only one theme, and that is the presidency of the United States. David, I want to go back almost to the day, 6 years, and there is an iconic photo of Donald Trump with his arms crossed and John Bolton standing next to him, and a leader of Japan, a leader of this, Rutte's in there, Macron's behind somebody's head, and Angela Merkel's got her hands on the table looking at this guy going, who in God's name are you? We have a NATO meeting coming up. Now, we're not going to get a photo op like this, but I'm sorry, is Donald Trump the most important person at the NATO meeting starting tomorrow?
He is who everyone is going to be talking about this meeting. Starting in Washington, the 75th anniversary meeting will kick off tonight with a gathering at the Mellon Auditorium, which is where the initial treaty was signed 75 years ago. So this was circled in red on President Biden's calendar. It was supposed to be a moment that he could kind of trumpet. He's done a lot to fortify and expand NATO. But now, of course, there are all these whisperings, louder than whispers, around him. And a lot of folks in that alliance are wondering aloud what the future looks like if we see a return to the way things were just a few years ago when Donald Trump was running the place and demanding more money, more contributions from its members. I fell apart with the Brussels with the circle flags. Yes, I've seen it. Anne-Marie Zordan's lived there. She's been at every coffee shop around ECB and EU in Brussels. There's a Sweden flag and there's a Finland flag. This president is going to say he did that. That's his success. Does he have the physical health energy now to take that victory lap at these NATO meetings? I think it's safe to say he wants to do that. This is an issue that is incredibly important to him. It has been throughout his career in public service, through the Senate, the vice presidency, and now the presidency. So if anything could animate him, it would be this event, trumpeting the achievements that you mentioned and also looking ahead to Ukraine, presumably joining this alliance in the coming years. There could be some haggling over the course of this meeting about what that path forward looks like for Ukraine. But Joe Biden cares deeply about NATO, cares deeply about trumpeting those achievements that you've outlined there, Tom. And I think that we will see him attempt to do that, really attempt to embrace that this week. And then, of course, there's this news conference on Thursday, which is a rare thing in this administration and an important thing as he faces the press and fields questions. Are they going to have prepared questions? I mean, it was like the radio show this week. That happened in Philadelphia. That anchor has parted ways with the station, or vice versa. From all that we know, the White House identifies reporters who might ask questions, and as I've read in reporting, has probed them for what they might ask, hasn't demanded that, and reporters have been reluctant to give it. But the way that this press conference has been characterized is it's supposed to be a longer than usual freewheeling press conference with multiple questions. So we'll see how that goes on Thursday, but hugely important. And David, we had Terry Haynes from Pangea on several days ago, and just kind of highlighting how this is such a critical time for President Biden with, his interview with ABC last Friday, the public events surrounding this NATO conference. He's got some, the press conferences you mentioned, he's got some campaigning next week. Is that kind of where we are? Is it kind of day to day here, it seems? Because the reporting all around suggests lots of different scenarios. Feels day to day, and you look at that reporting. The Journal's done it, we've done it, the Times has done it, the Post has done it, kind of going back and looking day after day what happened after that disastrous debate, and it feels very much like the campaign was trying to figure out what had happened, the White House trying to figure out what had happened and how to plot a path forward. It does feel very day-to-day now. I think of a forcing mechanism coming up, and that is Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee, is going to announce his vice president pick here in the coming days. You look at how much oxygen this story of President Biden's health has taken up. Presumably when that announcement is made, we'll see a shift in interest in who that person is going to be and what the relationship is going to be like between Mr. Trump and whoever that vice presidential nominee is going to be. But the White House has been in this defensive crouch for well over a week now, going back to last month's debate, and it does feel, Paul, like it is a day-to-day thing.
And there's so many scenarios out there. I guess the question is, it's really just the president's decision to make at the end of the day, it seems, or we go to a convention, which now Tom and I are going to be paying attention to, this convention. So is it just up to President Biden, does it seem like?
I think what's still unclear is the degree to which he's calling the shots here. And again, looking at those TikToks, those comprehensive summaries of what these last few days have been like, there's been a narrative that's emerged of a president who has wanted to do some things, not wanted to do others, going back to prep for the debate, preceding that even more. You know, an open question is how much is he making these decisions? How much are his advisors making these decisions? And he's done a number of these calls in recent days, one with the Congressional Black Caucus yesterday, which is a stalwart block of support for him, has been for many years. It seems like he impressed a lot of people who were on that call yesterday. He did another call with high-dollar donors. And I think that's something to watch in the days coming forward here. How much of them blanch what's happened here, decide to withhold their money, and of course they can't call the shot completely, but they can exert some pressure on this campaign.
High-dollar donors.
High-dollar donors,
is a Ricky Skaggs album from a couple years ago. David, I want to talk about one of these VP candidates. I think he's a piñata in the media, particularly the East Coast media. And when you look at the Wikipedia, the resume of J.D. Vance, I'm sorry, it's like he was built to be vice president. Granted, he's very young. But does anybody know his prodigious chops that got him to hillbilly elegy? And all, I think he's dismissed, and I don't understand why that is. Why is that?
You know, he was somebody who was widely embraced by the kind of elites that he now decries. That book that you mentioned, that memoir about his childhood in rural America in Appalachia, was widely read. He was invited to speak at big events. I remember covering the Allen & Company conference in Sun Valley a few years back, which is taking place now. He was an invitee there, so he was swimming in this pool of very elite, wealthy business people. He has since really embraced Donald Trump and his brand of politics and has become very close to the former president. I saw him at that debate on the spin room floor afterward. I should note he's very tall. He got a very striking figure, but you know, he has in these recent years moved away from that milieu that you're describing, Tom. That is, he was a Yale Law School graduate. He was somebody who was really, again, operating in and occupying this very elite echelon. He's tried to move away from that and cast himself as a very populist figure that would appeal to Donald Trump and be kind of in line with him.
And we should just make the distinction here. He was not Blue-Eyed Trust Fund 6'5" or whatever.
Correct,
like
yes.
The song. I just want to point out, Paul, that when you go to Sun Valley with David Gura, the snakes are out of the lawn.
You've always warned me.
He's wearing the Goki boots up to his knee. I mean, that's the old.
I had to impart that on Ed Ludlow. I said Tom's advice always is beware of the snakes. In the
beware of the snakes, and I didn't mean the venture capitalists. I meant the snake snakes.
You can fight those off with a stick.
Paul, get one more in here with Gura. He's too busy. His people. One of his interns just went like this,
pounding
folks,
at the door
with their watch. They're like, "Let's go." Gura's busy.
The Big Take podcast. I know you focused recently on the elections coming out of the UK and France. Big news there, which probably may have some impact on the U.S.
Yeah, I was very curious what lessons we could learn from what happened in France and the UK. And we spoke with Lena Laurent and Stephanie Flanders from Bloomberg Economics and Government. And incredibly important insights. I think that the takeaway that I got from both of them is what we saw there is a real pushback against incumbents. And so if I'm Joe Biden, this is another thing that might worry me, what I've seen there. But no doubt politicians here in the U.S. are going to be studying both what worked politically, what resonated with the electorate there, but also how they approached this from a very practical standpoint. Right. Certainly in France, you saw a very complicated calculation about how they could keep the far right at bay.
Gura.
I'm surprised to be here. I got a call last night, a very worried call that there's kind of a Monmouth County Roman holiday happening on the Garden State Parkway.
You betcha.
It is.
50cc Primavera riding up 30 miles an hour. They weren't sure that Paul was going to make it in, but I'm glad to see you, Paul.
Exactly. Could you see him with a Vespa in Brooklyn?
Oh, certainly.
Absolutely. I'm sorry.
I got to try it out. I'm eager to test drive it, but I followed that Wrapped yesterday. You haven't got one, Tom. You haven't bit the bullet. You might.
I am so jealous.
Go for the 150, I think, if you get it.
Me and Vet Bill on my lap going down Fifth
Sidecar for the puppies. I think.
This afternoon, Jess Bent and David Gura on Bloomberg Business Week, because they're all on the West Coast. Lisa Mateo in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, and the Carol Masser team, Stanovic and Masser, are going to Seattle to the Bloomberg Green Festival. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. NATO leaders are gathering in Washington this week as the military alliance confronts the prospect of the return of NATO skeptic Donald Trump to the White House. The summit kicks off today, and heads of state will work to shore up transatlantic support for Ukraine in its battle against Russia. But for host President Biden, it's just as much about demonstrating he is capable of meeting the grinding demands of the presidency for 4 more years. Bloomberg political news director for TV and radio, Jody Schneider.
He is clearly the nominee. He has, all the delegates. He has the money. If he doesn't step aside, it's hard to see how this is going to, he's going to have a significant challenger. He really does need to make that decision. We may see in coming days, with Congress coming back, more calls for him to step aside. But there are a lot of people rallying to his side.
Bloomberg's Jody Schneider. Donald Trump is getting back on the campaign trail. He is rallying voters at his flagship golf resort in the Miami suburb of Doral. Meanwhile, Trump has yet to make a final decision on his vice presidential pick. However, he tells Fox's Sean Hannity he plans to make an announcement in the coming week.
I haven't made final decision, but I have some ideas as to where we're going. And a little bit, we wanted to see what they're doing. To be honest, I think probably within the next week and a half, probably sometime. I'd love to do it during the convention. My people say that's a little complicated.
Donald Trump speaking on Fox. The Republican National Convention begins July 15th in Milwaukee. Alec Baldwin's trial in the fatal shooting of a cinematographer is about to begin. Jury selection starts today in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the actor's trial on a charge of involuntary manslaughter that could get him 18 months in prison. The judge and attorneys in the case say they expect the 12 jurors will be seated in one day and opening statements can begin tomorrow. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. And now, folks, we have to go there. Paramount. Is there a sum of the parts of the I Love Lucy, the catalog, or CBS?
Yeah.
Some people say the real estate is the only reason to buy it. I have no clue, but has anybody done a legit sum of the parts?
I've seen numbers north of $20 a share, closer to $25 a share, which is well below where the stock is trading right now. Sherry Redstone's going to get a premium here, but again, the real issue here is
trading at 11.
Yep.
And you're saying it's a double to some of the parts. Just,
Yeah, I've seen that research out on the street.
Just friends.
So we'll see here, and the public shareholders are going to get their $15. But you still see a big arbitrage there. Stock's only $11.25. So still a lot of uncertainty around this transaction. Will there be another bidder? I can't imagine, because it's been on the block for so long, and everybody knows what the asset is. It's been around forever, and everybody's kicked the tires on this thing. So I think this is the deal that's going to get done, and Sherry Redstone will get her money.
And then away from this, the Ellison, the younger, Warner Brothers Discovery just prints under 7.03 right now. Are they just assuming they're not going to do mergers in streaming? Is that,
I think what's going to happen is some of the streaming services themselves are going to merge and kind of come together and bundle, because you can't do it on your own, I guess, is kind of what a lot of these companies are coming to.
My head's spinning on this. Sort of, it's a nice release from Washington.
Lucas Shaw to keep us
Paramount. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. The Nasdaq leading the gains this morning, up 0.4%, 74 points at 18,479. The Dow down 0.3%, 124 points at 39,218, and the S&P 500 up 0.2%, 11 points, 5,584. We have the 2-year yield at 4.63%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.29%, and that's up 1 basis point. Shares of Nike, well, they're higher. They're up about 0.5%. It announced that it's going to be taking a senior executive out of retirement to help with their slumping retail sales. And then online pet food retailer Chewy, their shares are lower, down more than 1%. Argus research analyst cut her recommendation to hold from buy. And finally, not sure if it's pet friendly, but if you're looking to feel like royalty on your next vacation, Riyadh's Red Palace. It was built in the 1940s for the then Crown Prince. It's being transformed into a luxury hotel expected to open next year. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. This has been scheduled for ages. We've tried to get Mick Mulroy back on, and here he is, which is wonderful. An extended tour of duty with the United States Marines, with the CIA. Think of the movies in the fiction of Hollywood. There's got to be somebody out there that's actually almost lived it, and that would be Mick Mulroy. Over to the Pentagon and serving with the Department of Defense as well. We're thrilled that the officer of the Marines could join us this morning. Mick, I want to get away from the specificity of the news right now. I would believe for all Americans, our military abroad is now a gauze. There's an ambiguity to it. After Afghanistan and our exit there, however clumsy, there's Gaza, there's Ukraine, there's Taiwan, there's the Philippines and the Chinese in the South China Sea. How stable is the Pentagon abroad right now? Do we have a plan?
Oh, so great to be with you guys as usual. We do have a plan. Now, one thing that you could certainly say about the Pentagon is they have a plan for everything. There's people there just devoted to doing that. Now, it has to be adjusted, of course, regularly. For example, we always put China as our number one strategic competitor, if you will, adversary. But then a war breaks out in the Middle East. So we have to adjust, and that's what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff does, right? He or eventually she will move the military assets around based on what the reality is, not necessarily what we strategically would like to see.
I set you up with that question because I knew you'd answer it in a Mick Mulroy way. What is their plan with the politicians right now, given what we see in Washington or Paris or London? How does the Pentagon adjust to our democratic chaos?
Well, certainly there used to be an expression that politics ends at the water's edge, right? I think it was Senator Vandenberg that said that, with the idea that foreign policy to be effective has to stay at least somewhat consistent between administrations when they switch from Republican to Democrat, for example, in the U.S. system. That has kind of gone away from that. And quite frankly, it makes it hard to future plan. But the one consistent in that is generally the Pentagon. They have to posture and be prepared for most eventualities, certainly the most dangerous, and they have to adjust based on who is the commander-in-chief and their priorities. But that's what they do, and they have to prepare for it in case there's a switch again here in November.
Mick, as Tom mentioned, there's plenty of areas of the world that the Pentagon needs to be focusing on. Let's just focus on Israel right now. It's not just Gaza; it's also Hezbollah. Can you spin out for us kind of what the risk might be there? Because that sounds like a significant escalation were it to move there.
Oh, that's exactly right. So that's, they're focusing on the ceasefire right now in Gaza for two reasons. One, they want the ceasefire, of course, because it'll have hostages released, including some Americans. But it could also have an impact on whether the direct ground conflict between the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and Hezbollah happens in the north, right? It's a belief that if there's a ceasefire in Gaza, that Hezbollah will back off their near constant attacks in the north and potentially allow Israelis to go back to their villages if they're displaced from. So the big concern, of course, if that does kick off, Hezbollah is, I don't know, more than three times the size of Hamas when they started. So around 100,000 fighters, they claim. Oof. Plus they're getting volunteers from across the world. Quite frankly, all of Iranian proxies have essentially said they will join. And they have over 150,000 rockets and missiles, many of them precision guided. And that would overwhelm any air defense system, including the Iron Dome. So this could be very, very damaging to both countries, both their civilian infrastructures and their civilian population. So it is a huge concern of the United States, and it should be for everybody in the region.
What is your assessment of the ability to get a ceasefire in Gaza and maybe move to the next stage there?
So it looked pretty bad for a while because it was just clear, I think, to most that were watching it, that the only real entity that was looking for a ceasefire was the U.S. and Israel and Hamas. For different reasons, we're just not getting there. But it looks like that we have to be guarded because we've been here many times before. It looks like Hamas may have conceded on the need for a permanent ceasefire to get into the first phase. Right. That was something that Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government were just not going to accept. They wanted the ability to potentially start the fighting again if they needed to. So if that is true, and that's what they said, I think that's one of the reasons why all of the most significant negotiators like Director Burns is in the region right now talking about this. If that happens and they can get to the first phase, it could be a big win here.
I got to make this too quick, Mick, but I think it's so important given the chaos in Washington. One of your heroes, and folks, this is after I've read Max Hastings' incredible one volume on Vietnam, is James Stockdale, who was Perot's VP candidate ages ago. You talk about a stoic tone from James Stockdale, buried at Annapolis. He's the guy that taught John Glenn math and physics, to put it in perspective. What is it about James Stockdale that is not in Washington right now?
Well, it's a genuine hero. I mean, I'm not saying there's no heroes in Washington. It's a general statement. But Stockdale certainly is, I think everybody in the military, certainly from my generation and a couple before me, view him rightfully as a hero of heroes for what he did as a prisoner of war. And of course, as a Stoic, he's also one of the best modern depictions of Stoicism that I can think of, next to Secretary Jim Mattis, who I had the pleasure of working for, privilege. So I think it would really be good if we had more individuals like Stockdale in government. Quite frankly, it is duty over all. It's service over self, and it's just something that not just me, but I think most of the American population just doesn't see represented on either side right now. Hopefully that'll change, but it needs to.
A good conversation here with all that's going on in our politics in the Western world, and certainly with this important NATO meeting coming up. Again, we'll have complete coverage of the NATO meeting, leadership there. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines, Anne-Marie Horton, I'm sure, is involved, including all of our Washington News Bureau. Mick Mulroy with us there of the Lobo Institute in his public service to the nation. So I think we started a trend here. We got Gura looking at a Vespa.
Yep.
You have a Vespa.
Sure.
Mrs. Keene won't let me have a Vespa. But Tucker, I think, in tandem, going down the road. I
think I'm going to make a bid for Paul's old bicycle.
My old e-bike?
Yeah, the e-bike.
Yeah. Yeah, all right, well,
that might be on the market.
That could be. It could be
eBay.
Craigslist,
eBay as well. Lisa, you're leaving today. Safe travels.
Thank you. Yes.
Los Angeles, important. To Hollywood, I should say. Excuse me.
Yeah, Hollywood.
I miss
Hollywood. I'm going
Hollywood. I've been here 30 years. You know where they send me? Nowhere.
Carol and Tim are going to Seattle at the Bloomberg Green Festival.
Yep.
And
here's John.
Here we are.
I'll be heading to Bayonne, New Jersey later this morning.
In 5 minutes, Chairman Powell speaking to the nation. Some suggest it's important. The theme we're playing is music for Paul Sweeney on his Vespa, Steppenwolf.
Tell your dreams to me. Look inside, girl. Let the sound take you away.